Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Saturday, March 22nd, 2025. Thank you for joining me today. Definitely important follow-ups around the deportation conversation, not just in regard to Khalil, but specifically around the Venezuelan-El Salvador overlap that I think you'll definitely want to see today. One of the most frustrating parts of this ongoing conversation that's really been weighing on me is not just the difference of opinion that's always ever present in any political conversation. There will always be somebody who just disagrees. But the problem with today's conversation is that it's framed on both sides of this. I'm seeing a lot of people have interesting conversations around this where it seems a lot of honest people, and I have to believe that's the majority. Not necessarily honest, if that's the word you don't like, but that the majority of people want positive things. Put it that way. I mean, I think we have to believe that's the case, or what are we doing here? And so that shows me that there's a lot of people out there that obviously want to protect constitutional rights, want to save this country, or believe what they're doing, so what they're doing or that what they see happening, or at least the claims being made, will lead to that. The reason I'm having a hard time with this conversation is because it's inherently dishonest, where you can see both sides, as a lot of us have been calling out for a long time around partisanship, floating completely false narratives around either side and then arguing about both false things, whereas the truth is somewhere in the middle. And so what's frustrating, and I think at the same time there's a little bit of a positive note, is that we're having to battle back, people in this position, we're in the field of independent media, to battle back so much in the just incoherent, insufferable, nonstop, suffocating partisan narratives that just never stop falling, one after another, one conversation after another, to the point to where, and some of which is not important, but some of which definitely drowns out the important parts of the conversation. But the small positive in there is that I'm actually of the mind, as I make clear every day, that most people in these circles see what we're talking about. A huge portion of them on either side of this conversation, depending on what time frame we're talking about, just don't know what else to do. And the problem is that they are stuck there because of this false paradigm. They don't know what else to look at. So the problem is, that we see the issue. We see that things are being done that are unconstitutional. The only choice that seems left to them in the moment, because the other side is worse, of course, is, well, we just got to hope for the best. And you keep seeing that. We keep hearing that. Just give them a chance. It's like, at what point did we ever think that was the smart thing? I mean, the majority of people, to just give the politicians a chance, especially those that, even if they voted for them, are starting to go, this is just not what I thought would happen. So I'm not in any way suggesting there's an immediate solution to that, other than to lean into the people who are standing by their principles. If you're out there and uncomfortable with this, speak up about that. Because what's one of the most alarming parts of all this is whatever the background justification, whether it's Khalil and the idea of Hamas supporting, even though that's obviously, verifiably not even close to what's actually happening, or the different people around the immigration conversation, whether it's the border, whether it's the veteran who was scooped up in regard to the deportations early on, whether it's now people here. So, by the way, we're going to get into it even deeper today, some of which who are not even illegally here, but most of which who were illegally here, which still means in every context that they have constitutional rights. I'm going to keep repeating this as long as it takes for that to somewhat become a common understanding. It does not change the reality, as I'll point to again today. Even Scalia ruling that, of course, most importantly, in a deportation case for an illegal alien, yes, they still have due process. Yes, they still have they have the constitutional rights. So the problem is that whatever the underlying justification and context, what they're doing is unconstitutional. And it will be used to go forward. It will be used to suppress rights. And we're going to talk about the floated idea, whether a joke or a threat or a troll or not, about sending Americans to El Salvador because of Tesla vandalism and whatever a level above that would be. A Molotov cocktail in a car. I should have looked that up the other day. I was wondering what the term would be for that. Which I would argue is a felony. Absolutely, especially if it's a larger building. But the idea that this is being used to remove your rights, which is not technically possible. They just refuse to acknowledge them. And then the larger point of a lot of these things today, there's overlapping points, of course, is that they're doing things even in the interest of positive outcomes, or maybe, that what it appears to be driving towards, or even immediately having a positive outcome, but doing so in ways that guarantee it will not be that way. It will not stay that way. I think by design. Catherine Austin Fitts called this out right out of the gate. whether it's executive orders, whether it's just kind of running roughshod over the reality of the legal system. People are, whether you agree with it or not, whether you think it is the right thing or not, whether it even is, it will be challenged. And then, of course, you fall in this position where you go, well, but we want that to happen. Well, it might save the country. Well, that is the deep state. Okay, maybe you're right. But you have to also be honest enough to say, but it's also illegal. But what they're doing does undermine our right. And we had a conversation about this, I think, like the first couple of weeks of his administration, that, we're in uncharted territory in a lot of ways. Maybe the only answer is to find some extra legal, my opinion is we can't allow that conversation. We can't lean into the unknown with people in power structures who are packed full of people that have shown themselves to be liars, whether from foreign policy discussions, whether internally. We can't allow that hope for the best mentality to take over, even if that's the right thing to do at this point, because it will be used against us. And I mean, in the right sense of like what you immediately think is positive and what will happen. But today we'll go over, again, the follow-up to these stories and show you how, truly alarmed we should be, even if they have the best of intentions, that this is happening. I mean, we have to recognize that this is not a one, we're supposed to pretend that things will shift. There'll be other administrations, right? You're going to be handing these powers down the line. And as James Corbett just recently pointed out again, they're building blocks. It's one administration to the next, like we saw with COVID, like we saw with technocracy. It just continues with different narratives and different flavors. It's important that we stand up to these things. Now, I wanted to start with one quick point that I thought was interesting. I just saw as I was sharing the show, just for those to see it, in case you haven't seen me mention this. I believe we're going to somewhat be censored or pushed off more on this platform. I don't know how many people still use Hive. I've used it a lot for a long time. It used to have a pretty good return with their token. But at the moment, it's honestly more about me just putting it on another platform. I post it everywhere we can, all of our work. I've recently pointed out on the show how there's large accounts on here, and the more influence you have, the more you can upvote and downvote and potentially give or take away more funds. That's how this platform works. If you downvote, the money goes down. If you upvote, the money goes up. And if you have a huge account with a lot of influence, you can upvote and give people like $10 or more, or take it all away. My point is that on this platform, right about after October 7th and our work, whether that's related or not, these major whale accounts on here started just downvoting everything. So I got zero no matter what, which again, I really don't care about. As I responded to them and told them, it's just about me posting my content. They were trying to say that we were spamming, or I'm posting my original content on my account. Of course, it weirdly seemed to correlate with all the Israeli content, and a lot of the other people on this platform stood up and said, well, whether you agree with it or not, this is supposed to be a censorship-free platform. You're basically censoring him financially. Let him, and then people have counteract and voted upward. And so even though they're doing that, you can see a lot of votes, but still some money, which shows you that the platform is essentially overriding their attempts to financially censor me. Now, that's what's been going on for a long time. I don't even really care. It's just about getting my work out there. This started happening. And this is one of these accounts that are kind of like the Hive watchers, like an auto account for some of these background users that are large. And it says, hey, there is reasonable evidence that this article, except it's not an article, it's my video and a link to a video on my website that I wrote, nobody else involved in, funny, has been rewritten, spun, or reworded from the source that you have provided. You mean my website for my account? It's insane. It never ends for TLAV, guys. It never ends. It's always something's coming after us. And it says, we would appreciate if you could avoid spinning, rewriting full partial text, and that's insane. I said, my God, you guys are so dishonest. It's insane. I'm talking about the people behind this, not everybody on this platform. This is not even an article. It's my original work being posted on my account. If you're going to censor me more so than the financial censorship you're already conducting against me, then just do it. Own it. All right? Stop being a whatever word you'd like to include there. Show some constitution, just own what you're doing. But by the way, the point I'm bringing it up for is it's been posted on this one, a bunch of different accounts, all on mine, with different posts. So that aside, I just want to include that for you in case you had been following that part of the story. Now, where we were going to start today. Today's basic overview, I want to make sure we're going to basically start with the conversation of a few things I want to point out, how that overlaps with some partisan stuff, get into some overlap around the deportation constitutional right point as it pertains to Venezuela, El Salvador, then specifically around how it's interestingly being kind of warped into this Tesla conversation, and then talk about how the incredible, I don't even know if there's a word big enough to describe what the hell Israel's doing right now and how that's being ignored by most of this country, it seems, which is disgusting. But I wanted to start with this just so you kind of saw where this is ongoing right now in the world. As we're forced to dive through all these partisan, ridiculous stories, left and right, about things that seem to be largely meaningless in the context, even for this country. This is what's going on. This is the leading Israeli newspaper. This is posted yesterday. Even anti-war Israelis are scared to say Gazans are human beings. Now, I'm going to come back to this in a point later in the show. And we keep pointing this out, whether it's Caitlin Johnstone, Kim Iverson, or even plenty of right-leaning people who are going, Israel's committing genocide. And of course, talking about plenty of other things, as you know, if you are paying attention or watch the show at all, that's not the only thing we're talking about. Now, there's plenty of ways that a lot of these stories very much do tie back to Israel, and I make sure to point that out. But we talk about a lot of stuff on this show. Pretty sure that the Tesla conversation, whatever else, doesn't relate to this. My point is that it's interesting how many people seem to be raising the fever pitch of like the desperate argument that you only talk about Israel and that's all you care about because you secretly hate Jews. I mean, to me, I most of the time just brush that off because it's so ridiculously stupid. Not that that's not existing somewhere in the world, but for how long this has been going on and how much we've covered and how clearly I go out of my way to make sure you understand what I'm actually talking about. And it's definitely not only Jewish people or Israelis. But I think it's interesting to think about how much that's been driving. People are afraid to talk about this. And still today, which is insane to me. But especially within the Republican part of this conversation right now. And I think you know why that's obvious. So I want to just point at that for two reasons, to show you how clearly this is something we should be paying attention to, because your tax dollars and your government are literally hand side by side with what this is. There's no decoupling what your government, our government, is doing with your money in your name. So we can't even pretend any longer that this story is not an American story. What this is our responsibility. Let's make sure we're clear about that. It's also the response, in the sense of holding our government accountable, not that we are personally responsible. I would never argue that, especially since a lot of us, I think the majority, are outspokenly against this. Now, whether you decide to continue to give tax dollars or not is a whole different conversation, seeing as how they'll come and put you in a cell if you choose not to give over their demands, known as taxes. But I wanted to point that out because the other reason is simply that I think it's fascinating and alarming that there's a lot of people on the right side of this conversation that are trying to hide this because it's influencing this government more than we've ever seen in our lives. And don't want average people on that side to recognize what this really is and how this relates to what's literally happening right now and is about to apparently be aimed at Americans. But from Israel's perspective and the Israeli platform, I want to just read you a couple parts in this, and we're going to read more of it as we go into the part down later in the show. This is again from yesterday, Haaretz. Israel recently committed the largest child massacre in its history. 200 children and 100 women were killed in one day. Altogether, about 400 civilians were killed, and the number of dead is not yet final. These numbers are not reported in the Israeli media, and if they are, it's always minimized in an outrageous manner. Just incredibly upfront about how they're downplaying, ignoring murder, guys. Murder. Although resuming the war will kill the hostages, it mainly kills masses of Palestinian men, women, children, and the elderly. It's already impossible to distinguish between things in Israel. It's impossible to distinguish the media from the public, because even those who oppose the war are afraid to say that Gazans are human too. It isn't a problem of the media concealing or manipulating. It is the fruit of militaristic racist indoctrination that begins in kindergarten and continues until death. Sort of sounds like the way they love to point at all Palestinians, doesn't it? An indoctrination that needs destruction to justify its existence of Zionism. The leading Israeli newspaper. Think about how that's possible with what we're being largely the Republican side of this government is shoving down your throats right now. To be clear, I mean that in the sense of the circle. The left and right of your government, who are just one thing, are absolutely on the same page here. But all of the government apparatus around the right circle in the administration right now are absolutely aggressive, more than I've ever seen with this conversation. I think that's because they're either working for this government or literally in line with the Zionist agenda, to the point where these interests are more important than yours, as in, not America first. It's funny how that can be such an explicitly tied conversation to everything they seem to be fighting for. And then you highlight, how is that America first? Oh, you just hate Israel. It's like, okay, let's not even say that's the case. Answer my question. It's like, what are you even talking about? What is that? How is it relevant to the fact that that's literally the opposite of what then you stand back and go, oh, okay, they're not actually America first. They're also saying that when they think something else. There's a lot of that out there, guys. And that's the problem with it. Like I said, a lot of good people who just want good things are choosing to fall in line with a lot of willfully dishonest people who are using your love of this country. I just hope it can break through to some people to recognize that you are good, you want good things, and they're taking advantage of that. It says, how is it possible to insist on freedom and justice without any reference to the inconceivable human price of this war? How is it possible to devalue life in Gaza, which has become so cheap for Jews in Israel, while simultaneously calling for the preservation of Israeli democracy? Exactly what democracy are we talking about? One that carries on its back such enormous, terrible destruction every day? We're going to come back to that. Now, I wanted to start with just to shout this out because it's been a while since we've had some panels, but it's, I think, like 8 or 9 of them, I think, so far for the Independent Media Alliance. Now, right now, we just had a recent meeting with Odyssey to show us kind of the updates and everything. And we have like a staging site that we're looking through. We're almost there. With our kind of 1.0 version, we're thinking maybe in a couple of weeks, but don't quote us on that because these building of sites, especially with this new decentralized kind of Web 3.0 background that is going to be part of this. Maybe not necessarily entirely on 1.0, but that's the point. We want to get this out, that's what they're working on, which is why it could take longer. The point is ultimately that this is something that is going to be, revolutionary is a good word for what they're doing in general, not just this part of it, but what Odyssey's trying to build, decentralized internet, guys. That's what this is. And so we were one of the first people they reached out to, if not the first, to say, hey, let us build this for you. Absolutely. No financial transactions, no give and take. They just wanted to do it because they believe in what we're doing. That's what this kind of thing represents right now. IMA has no funding mechanisms. We're just a group of people trying to fight for what we believe in. Feel free to challenge that. Don't take my word for it, guys. Never question everything, but feel free to look through it and don't assume, like you see a lot of people in the chat going, well, it has to be CIA because they can't have that many people together. Sure, question that, but I'm sure as hell would love some evidence for things to be claimed like that. But it says, but my point was basically showing you that Activist Post put out which is Charlie Robinson now, put out basically an overview of the people involved so far. So if you haven't seen it, I don't know why that's fuzzing out. What is that? Why is it doing that? I'm not sure. That's weird. Well, here's the actual image. So you can see everybody involved, and you guys are some of them haven't been on panels necessarily yet. For example, I think I'm pretty sure. I think Richard Grove hasn't been on one just yet. But in general, the point is that this is going to continue to grow. So I just want to shout that out. And as soon as they're done with this website, it's going to be really cool, guys. I'm excited about what it's going to be, and it's going to be basically centrally for any IMA, Independent Media Alliance collaboration content, but then each one of us will have our own personal part on that website. So you can then look from the main panel and then go, I want to see what Charlie said today, and go look at his personal stuff on his platform, that kind of stuff. I think it'll be cool. And overall, the point is simply just to, there's clearly some organization on some very deceptive things today. They're trying to kind of, the whole groups that were screaming black pilled and purity test about people who were pointing out things that very clearly went. Let's be clear about that, by the way. We were calling out things before the selection process of Trump that we were called black-pilled for that have literally already happened. And those same people who were screaming we were being irresponsible and black-pilled are now the ones halfway pointing it out. That's worth noting, and that's why we started something like this. More to come. Now, I also want to shout out an interview I did yesterday that I was just really, this is such a fascinating conversation. Now, I'm personally interested in this just for my own reasons. I find this stuff fascinating. And, today's iteration of kind of what I do is really clearly focused on just factual breakdowns, what we can prove. But I've got history and, my very first thing ever doing it in this field, like independent media, or I guess whatever, whatever you want to call it, was all focused around different conspiracy theories and understanding things. And, it's not to say that's even what this is. My point is the outside the box thinking. I love diving into these things and asking questions. And this is something I've been thinking about for a long time, since somebody introduced me to what's called the Yuga cycle a long time ago. Now, as I was reading this book I came across called The Yuga Shift, I ended up kind of finding a lot that really overlap with what's going on today. Incredible ways. And I'm going to actually read to you my opening here so you can understand what this is about. But what was most important to me about this is, like I always say, it's not necessarily that you have to believe, even though there's like anthropological evidence and scientific background, there's a lot around this that's insane. It's like very provable things. But whether or not you agree with it or believe in it, the point is whether people in power do. We talk about that a lot, right? And so whether you think you buy this or not, the point is it possible people in power are of the mind that we're about to enter into a time frame of cataclysm? Historically, that seems to be accurate. Pretty much every 2,700, 3,000 years between that, there seems to be major cataclysm, and it's civilization destroying. And then all of a sudden, and you can look, this is history. And so whether they know that or not, or they think this is why, whatever, we see bunkers being built and things being done, actions that drive us in technocracy, efforts to put the mind in the cloud. So they're basically can't die. I mean, there's a lot of very weird things happening. So his name is Bibhu Dev Misra. And the title of this is The End of the Kali Yuga, which was the 21st, and the Revolution of Consciousness. Here's what I wrote. Joining me today is researcher and author Bibhu Dev Misra, here to discuss his book, Yuga Shift, which examines what is known as the Yuga cycle and how this ancient planetary cycle may be causing a massive shift in consciousness that is historically coupled with potentially cataclysmic events. We discuss what the Yuga cycle is, how it relates to countless myths and religious beliefs throughout history, but also how in many ways it can be scientifically verified using anthropological evidence and observable fact. Today, it is not hard to recognize the almost dramatic shift in awareness to many classically held and I would argue incorrect beliefs, as well as the corresponding government-led violence in response. I mean, I can't stop pointing out how about Zionism in general, COVID-19. I mean, people have clearly stopped buying a lot of this, and I think that's part of it personally. It says, few are unfamiliar with the recent and jarring agendas, such as the Great Reset, that left many wondering what had changed or what those in power knew that we did not. And of course, let's not forget that Elon Musk is now running the same agenda. I mean, a barely different flavor, and people are lapping it up. All of this, Bibhu argues, is related to and can be explained by the natural and recurring 24,000-year evolution of the Yuga cycle. Or depending on different arguments, and this is always important with this stuff background-wise, there's people that argue that this is, thousands of years off. Most of the general consensus seems to be somewhere around this time frame, but you could argue 24,000 or between 25,800, depending on the different way it's broken up. Either way, the argument is right now we're entering into a new phase, regardless of the disputes about which one it is, which I find really fascinating. Now, it's entertaining if it's in a very interesting esoteric way, and I hope people will take time to listen to it. I genuinely believe that there is something to this. As always, whether that's something we don't really understand or whether it's exactly what he claims, there's too much to ignore in all this. If you read the book or just listen to our conversation, it's kind of crazy. In a very entertaining and good, but at the same time kind of alarming way, depending on whether you think something's going to shift or whether they might do something based on that belief, right? But I want to include this again. I'm not going to read it again just because I just can't. I'm going to include this because I want to point out something new that he said. Free Prince said yesterday. But I just pointed this out again, and it's just about this having faith in people, as Catherine says, 100% faith in Cash Patel and Dan Bongino. And Free Prince wrote this out in a way that was just so profoundly on point. Just that, bottom line, we should not have faith in any human being, like 100% faith. The bottom line is you can believe in somebody, but to just blindly say 100% faith, that is, as he writes, it's, as he says, lazy. The abdication of responsibility. Very well said in the reality of this. He goes, there's no more dangerous sentence in the modern world than I have 100% full faith in. And he's talking about people. I simply said, read this, then read it again. Then save it, read it again tomorrow. The partisan conversation is being driven by a minority of screaming children who are being empowered by villains who could not care less about you and yet garner absolute faith from the two-party illusion. Now, I wanted to read what he said here. He says, your team isn't winning. In fact, you're not even on the team you think you are at all. The right thinks they're dismantling the federal government. And this is what led to one of the thoughts I was saying earlier. The left thinks they're watching it happen. Both are wrong. Now, when you're stuck in the middle of that, and in fact, in many cases, proving certain things with facts, and yet you're drowned out by these conversations on either side of this, and I don't think either are the majority, but they scream loud enough and get pointed to by the corporate media, that's all works together and creates this false impression of what's really going on. For their benefit, of course. But when they're both wrong and they're both, it's infuriating. It's exhausting. But that's what we're here for. But he says the federal government isn't being dismantled. It's not shrinking. It never does. Not under Republicans, not under Democrats. It grows always. Now, that'll be a good thing to come back to. I completely agree. And quite frankly, I think we still see that right now. You do see things changing, moving, sure. shuffling things around, more funding here. Oh, we stopped the war there. Oh, 50 billion now can go to Yemen, as Thomas Massey pointed out. It's all about a shifting of the game, guys. Now, let's say we go forward a year, 2 years, 4 years, and it's dramatically different and we can prove that they shaved off half what we spent. Sure, I will scream their praises. Right now, as we already saw, they've actually increased spending. That's the provable reality. Now, sure, maybe they'll change tomorrow, but right now, it's worth being honest with yourself about what's happening. This is almost always what happens, and the narrative is what changes. He says Republican politicians feed their base platitudes about budget cuts and draining swamps while quietly voting to fully fund the entire apparatus they claim to oppose. Democrats scream about fascism and institutional collapse, knowing full well that every department, agency, and welfare mechanism is alive and well, humming along with bipartisan approval. It's all performance. The right-wing voter boasts about winning, as if their money isn't being extorted and at gunpoint and funneled into an ever-expanding abyss of waste, propping up an Orwellian nightmare. The left-wing voter panics about losses, while every tool of state power they cherish remains untouched and continues expanding in scope. Nothing gets cut. Nothing gets dismantled. Nothing changes except the script. Now, a point to make there, even if you see money even diminishing in how much is being spent, realize what we're really talking about is that they've created new government agencies, new government task forces. Sure, some may go away. Many rarely do. And that's more government to deal with the act of removing government. That sure seems counterintuitive, but yeah, trust the plan, guys. The point is that if you keep building out agencies and different groups and different task forces, and you have to fund those task forces, maybe they end up taking away some things, but when you stand back and look at the bigger picture, that's why you look last month, they actually increased spending. Maybe it'll change tomorrow. This is simply theater. He writes, the only real bipartisan consensus is to lie to your base well enough to keep the machine running, feed the outrage, fan the tribal flames, keep the voters fighting each other instead of asking why the hell both parties keep growing the same Leviathan they claim to be battling. You're not winning. You're not represented. You're being handled. And I get it. I get why it's easier not to think. It's easier not to be an individual. It's easier to outsource your autonomy to someone who speaks with confidence and promises to carry your burden for you. Thinking is hard. Defining your own values is work. Living without a script takes effort. So most people don't. They hand the keys over to the nearest charismatic tribal leader and call it good enough. In fact, I would argue more so that they're convinced that's what they need to do because that's what responsible people do. But here's the problem, he writes. They're not good enough. They're not looking out for you. They are looking out for themselves. That person you're following, they're just making it up as they go. They're not informed. They're not wise. They're not grounded in principle. They just perform confidence convincingly enough for you to give them your loyalty. And in doing so, your critical thinking. And if they're going to do what's best for them, then so should you. Because the second you abdicate your role in your own decision-making, you're no longer participating in politics. You're being ruled by it. And that's how we end up with two tribes of people living in completely different realities, disagreeing on basic facts because they've all outsourced their brains to people who are just making shit up. It's a mess. But it makes people feel good. It gives them a side, a team to root for, a reason to boast when their guy wins. It's all just identity cosplay. That's the point about left-right politics. It's both woke left, woke right. It's identity politics. It's the same conversation. Most people aren't fighting for policy. They're fighting for the illusion of belonging. They think they're on the king's court because they voted for the guy who holds the scepter. But they're not. They're spectators, pawns, collateral. Every headline, every outrage cycle, every carefully framed win or loss is just another page in a script designed to keep you emotionally invested in a game you don't play. And while you're arguing with your neighbor about which side is doing the most damage, they're laughing from the hilltop, signing off on trillion-dollar budgets, enriching themselves with their friends with your money, and quietly ensuring that nothing you actually want ever happens. Kind of hard to look back through our own history and pretend that's not the case. He says, so no, the right isn't winning. The left isn't losing. The only ones losing are the people still pretending their team gives a damn about them. Now, I guarantee you already expect the kind of answer you're going to get in response. Maybe even you felt that was a little bit black-pilled as I was reading that. Now, this is a fascinating conversation. Let's see if I can get this to pop up. I should have grabbed this earlier. what was it? The white pill. James Corbett did a great, I think that's, right here, perfect. He had a couple of us on to do a little breakdown on this. I'll include this for you. It's called James Corbett and Friends Deliver the White Pill. Now, this is a conversation about what these things mean. And the reality being that what we're talking about is, even with this kind of an angle to it, he's talking about you empowering yourself and stop relying on other people to outsource your decision-making or how in the world could that ever be blackpilled? Now, on top of that, maybe you think he's wrong. Let's just say he is wrong. Let's say he's completely wrong and these people are fighting for you. I mean, you could argue it's blackpilled to say that he's incorrect in thinking that they're all against you, but you don't know that for sure. None of us know that for sure, right? We're basing it on past. You could clearly prove in the past that's the reality, but maybe right now we're different, right? Maybe these people are saving us. The point is that at some point, we need to be able to recognize that this could be the reality, that these people could be tricking you. And so to point out an obvious possibility, historically backed up, how can that possibly be blackpilled to point out something we know, especially since half the paradigm says that is what's happening, but the other side's doing it. So then you agree, but only insofar that it's one side of the paradigm. And if we include all of you, then now you're blackpilled. Doesn't that seem a little bit ridiculous? Now, the reality is that what he's calling for is for you to think for yourself and for you to rely on yourself, not to just ignore everything, but simply stop pretending that they are on your side, which is these are your government or a government. The whole reality, especially if we want to lean into what our founding fathers laid out, then that would be that we're supposed to challenge them. What is the quote from? I think it is. Let me see. I think it's Theodore Roosevelt. Yeah, Theodore Roosevelt. To announce that there must be no criticism of the president or that we are to stand by the president, right or wrong, is not only unpatriotic and servile, but is morally treasonable to the American public. See, if I just said that to somebody today without quoting this Republican, they would probably call me a Democrat or whatever. They would push back on it. That we're supposed to serve, like we keep seeing today, like I'll show you in a minute. Servile. It's an intense word. It means having or showing an excessive willingness to serve or please others. Sycophants is a synonymous word there. So this is what we need to understand. And so what he's simply showing you is that we need to be questioning these people. Don't ignore them, but question them. Hold them to account. But of course, you get this kind of response. Your point is not lost, but Trump did. Was that the right one? Hold on. Make sure I got no, this one says the biggest black pillar on the internet. I mean, you could argue he's wrong, but I think to argue black-pilled is simply it's people that want to argue that the right way would be to just give them a shot and see what happens. That's called willful ignorance, as far as I'm concerned. He says, I'm refusing to delude myself. He said, if refusing to delude myself is black-pilling, then so be it. I'm not here to sell comfort. I'm here to say what's true. Now, that's the other way to look at it. If it is true, which certainly is possible, how could it possibly be black-pilled? Which, by the way, again, things that we said before this process, and they called us black-pilled, has now happened. Many examples of it, including the war with Israel, for example, that is still not only is continuing, it's been ramped up. So were we black-pilled or were we correct? And it says it's not pessimism, it's clarity. He says if that scares people, maybe the problem isn't the message, it's the illusion they're clinging to. Well put. But you can scroll down. Oops, went too far back. You can scroll down, look at some of the different responses. It's kind of the same back and forth. And I like this one. This guy says, cynical take, my guy. And he goes, correct. It's like, yep. I mean, it's like one of those ways you can say that, right? If you're not cynical today, you're not paying attention. It's like these people are constantly showing you over and over, and I mean, consistently, that they are not to be trusted. And yet to point out that they might be deceiving you is cynical. It's like, no, that's just being observant, guys. It's very clear. But I'll leave that there. I thought that was an important one. I really do appreciate the things he's putting out. I thought I had a statement around it. I guess not. I'll include this quote, Theodore Roosevelt. Now, on the note of that, right, the blind trust for partisanship, I think it's important to point out how some of this is taking place and how easy it is to fall into whatever they present for you. I mean, let's be clear. I mean, anybody who cares to be honest about this, just on this show, but plenty of other ways too around the media sphere, there's been endless examples of them getting caught lying, which is not debatable, like knowingly deceiving you about certain things, being wrong. or in some cases, some kind of undefined lie, wrong, overlap of posting contracts that were not there, posting contracts that were removed before even Biden came into office, posting the wrong amount, and I mean, endless. So it's like the only logical thing right now is we can't take them at face value. So my point on this is that you get these kind of conversations, the USAID scheme. Well, yes, guys, let's start with the reality that if anybody is still pretending like we don't already know that USAID and National Endowment for Democracy are a bipartisan regime change engine that are used constantly. Yes, for censorship. Yes, for infiltration. Yes, and it's been going on for decades. Trump used it excessively during his last administration. So it's not to say that it's still good that people can be aware of this, right? That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying bad that they're pointing to it in the context of now. That would be you making that up in your mind. Yes, it's good to call it out. Our point is it's important to call it out in its entirety and not give you a limited version, a limited hangout, to highlight that all of our governments, including our current president, have been using this scheme, this censorship tactic, especially during COVID-19. But what they're exposing now is that it connects to larger things and then ultimately trying to use that to argue that they're stopping it. But are they? It's a real question. We already know USAID has not been shut down or dismantled or all the words they keep using. Rubio publicly said days into this that they were not shutting it down, that we're only going to be using it for what we want. So it continues. And clearly it doesn't even seem like they're even really stopping a lot. They're just moving things around. But we'll have to wait to see how this really develops. That's the only honest way to cover it because we keep catching them lying. It says USAID censorship scheme exposed. Okay. For what, the 75th one we found out? Clearly it continues, but it says Global Engagement Center worked with UK government, which is really why I'm pointing this out. You'll see why. And media firms to deploy AI tools. Interesting. Who seems to be aggressively trying to deploy artificial intelligence everywhere? I mean, kind of hard not to think that there's an overlap here, but that's not the real point. My main point is that they're showing you this, and it's just being regarded as a Democrat ploy to take down. So when we bring these things up and you ask why we're not up, why aren't we happy that it's being exposed? Well, it's not being exposed. If your only response is a Democrat thing, then even though we can prove that it spans through both administrations, then you're being dishonest and shouting us down for pointing out the full picture. But here he says, wow, this is crazy. The same old story we've heard from the same group 47 times. Wow, because he wants you to be that kind of thing is how you raise this up to get 12 million views about something that is a story. It's worth reporting, but it's nothing new. It's an ongoing reality that's been pointed out 400 many times as you can imagine. But that's, again, not even why I'm pointing it out. But here is America First Legal saying explosive new documents, expose, a massive government-backed censorship operation orchestrated by USAID, the Global Engagement Center, the UK government, and media firms to manipulate public discourse and silence Americans. Okay, yeah, it's important we highlight this, right? It's important we highlight it, that it took place in Obama's administration. It's important to highlight that it took place in Bush's administration. It's important to highlight that it took place in Trump's administration. It's important to highlight that your government has been using this exact thing against you forever. Now, anyone framing it any other way than that is being dishonest with you. It's an effort to try to house these things on one part of the paradigm so you miss half the story and so that they can keep using it in ways that you're not paying attention to, which we can already prove. I can already show you contracts that I've already done on more than one show that this is not stopping. Okay. Here's the interesting part. In this America First Legal, it says the documents reveal a disturbing alliance between the GEC, the USAID, the British Foreign Commonwealth Development Office. Interesting. The FCDO. Okay. Read through this if you want more details on it. It's important to see that this is happening. It's very real, and the censorship global dynamic is very obvious. And let's not forget that the major censorship engines in the whole conversation they're completely tapped into right now in this government. Very much so. Whether it's the overlap with Twitter and the reality of censorship, or the World Economic Forum Yakarino, or the ADL overlap, or the Zionism control, or the tech, they're all using the same tools. Like the idea that we could pretend like they're not aggressively censoring around hate speech right now. And that's no different than the Democrats doing it for a slightly different framing, even though it's hate speech, then you're just lying to yourself. It is everywhere. And literally, they've taken a step further. They've started deporting people from the country for using hate speech. Or really, even crazier, things that aren't hate speech. They just claim he wink, wink means the hate speech. But look, here, the point again is about the Commonwealth. So what is that? or rather the FCDO is the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Mr. So the point is UK government. And so what we're highlighting is that they're using this. So apparently, again, if you want to look at the framing online, it's the Democrats working with the UK government, USAID, to censor people. Yeah, but it's all of our government. But here's the point, which is why this is so interesting. Oh, and here's the contract, if you want to look through it. Trump weighs in on report King Charles will offer U.S. membership to the British Commonwealth. He says, sounds good. I mean, the contradictions are everywhere. So clearly what's interesting to me is that if we're going to call that out, which we should, but in a full picture, we should recognize that you just pointed out that they're working with the Commonwealth of the UK, the group that involved with that, to censor people around the world. And on the 21st, Trump says, sounds good. I love King Charles. Let's do it. In regard to making a secret offer. I'll show you directly from The Sun. To Donald Trump after Starmer hand-delivered letter from the king. It says, nearly 250 years after America declared independence from Great Britain, President Trump suggested he was open to taking a small step back towards the warm embrace of the British monarchy after a media outlet reported that King Charles III intends to extend an offer to the United States to join the Commonwealth of Nations. So are we fighting globalism? Or are we leaning into the whole European? I mean, guys, you can't pretend this is not kind of crazy. Now, yes, you're going to get the response you get from everything from them. Well, he was just saying it to get a better deal. He didn't mean it. You took him out of context, like Greenland, like every other thing that's now actually started to happen that they all said was a troll before it started to happen. The bottom line is you got to take these things at what they say. Otherwise, nothing means anything. Yeah, maybe he's lying. Maybe he's wrong. At this point in time, he tweeted out himself, truthed it out, whatever you want to call it, saying, yes, sounds good to me, about that exact conversation. And it literally says that they're going to offer him basically to extend the overlap around the United States from the Commonwealth of Nations, from Britain. The king is reportedly prepared to extend an offer of associate membership in the voluntary association of 56 nations, which of most have history as former British colonies. So too with the United States then, apparently. And it says Trump, it seems, is open to the idea. Writing on Truth Social, I love King Charles. Sounds good to me. That seems pretty crazy, especially since most people in his support base would, one, be very critical of King Charles for 70 reasons. I mean, Elon Musk probably has 17 posts about how there's some kind of pedophile overlap to that country, which there very much is, by the way, in the power structure, just like there is in this country, that you should be aware of. But I just find it overarchingly interesting that we're talking about this group that they're making right now. That's a huge story in the Twitterverse about the breaking scandal of the USAID, I think largely to get you stop looking at other things that are happening. At the same exact time, Trump floating the idea that we're going to basically fall back under the auspices of the UK government. Well, I guess it wouldn't be that. You could frame it however you'd like. It is not what they claim they're fighting for. And I would agree that many of us are trying to fight against, which is the idea of, I mean, look, if they're claiming they want America first, nationalism, whatever, that's not what this represents, guys. But I'm sure they'll find a way to work themselves into a pretzel to argue why somehow this is that. Sort of how the left argue that ESG was something good. At the same time, we're going to keep using oil and nuclear weapons because we'll make that the case. Contradiction. The reality is always is they don't mean any of them, guys. They're using them to get you in certain places when they do the same things they always do. Don't fall for it. And then Jay Scott simply says, is this what America first looks like? Subservience to Israel and the British monarchy? That's a good question. And then meanwhile, Secretary Rubio, starts going after the real important things, right? Today, I announce, he says, the designation under Section 7031C of former president of Argentina, Cristina Elizabeth Fernandez de Kirchner, and former Argentine Minister of Planning, Julio Miguel de Vito, for their involvement in apparently significant corruption during their time in office. That's it. Period. End of story. The United States is committed to ensuring there's accountability for corrupt officials around the world, he says. I mean, should we stop and laugh? Did you fall out of your chair just now as I was reading that? First of all, I'm pretty sure the Republicans have been screaming to take down these Argentine ministers, right? Isn't that was a number one promise? Promises made, promises kept. I mean, what does this even matter? What is the relevance of this? Now, I'm not trying to say that, here's what's funny. If this was happening from another context, from the Republicans would call out why this was, the funny thing is that you could always make an argument for why we have to hold people accountable. Okay, well, if that's the case, then why is it only selectively applied against certain people for political reasons? At the same time, they would be calling this out about the left. The point is that you can always find a justification. If you care about what we need to do in this country, ask yourself, what's the meaning of this? Why is Pam Bondi investigating October 7th? Why are they all flying to Israel? I'm not even saying this is connected. I'm just saying things that aren't America first. Why would this be the focal point of the Secretary of State when they haven't done damn near anything they actually promised they would do? Where are the Epstein files? Why have you stopped the wars ongoing? Are you continuing to work with Israel to commit genocide? Yes. All those things are yes. Or rather, yes, being the last one, but Epstein files are no longer, have not been presented. Not really. Ben Norton, of course, highlights, speaking of real corruption, Marco Rubio lobbied for his drug trafficking brother-in-law, Orlando Cecilia, to get a real estate license, which he then got. Cecilia was imprisoned for distributing $15 million of cocaine. That's why he's known as Narco Rubio. But who cares about that, though, right? Let's go after the people we don't like. Now, I'm willing to bet you that you could dive into the Argentina connection and you'll recognize that there's a very political reason for why they're doing this. This is something I added toward the end, so I haven't got a chance to dive through it enough. You have thoughts? Let me know in the chat. The point is, this is not at all what you would think. Why is this a priority? It's probably in my mind because something else is happening, whether somebody else wants this to be done or because these people were fighting against their agendas. That's who we do. Funny how they're calling Houthis pirates when I've never seen a better representation of pirates and mafiosos in my life. The people that are acting for their own interests at the expense of everybody, including you. Wendy simply says, why aren't state employees being fired? Right? Wasn't that the big point about all if we're to be told that it was all these deep state Democrats and yet he stepped in and nothing's really changed, then are they just waiting to use that excuse in every department to go, well, we had holdovers and now we're going to deal with it? The point is, it's all a big story. Like Free Prince was talking about, guys, this is a theater show. These people are your government. As long as they can keep you debating on what, keep giving them the benefit of the doubt while jumping at every shadow they throw in front of you, then nothing will ever change. Dimitri says Netanyahu was under indictment for corruption, yet you're kissing Netanyahu's ASS. You and Trump have zero credibility when it comes to corruption. Or you could point out 100 other examples. What about Saudi Arabia, right? What about many different allies? What about Britain? What about France? What about Macron? Are different people that have historically been shockingly dishonest or corrupt? Nope, they selectively apply it to who they don't like. Freedom, democracy. Well, on that note, though, let's talk about how they're pushing back. Right? Against people trying to, stop what they're doing, to make it very objective. Right? Because look, I'm not like I said the other day, I would never argue, because it's obvious that it's the case, that there's no political motivation. Literally everybody in this conversation has political motivation. Elon Musk, Donald Trump, Rubio, and most definitely every single political judge has been appointed by both one or the other side. That's what's so frustrating about this, is it just never, the conversation continues to get mired in this back and forth. Again, like I said before, the false binary of things that aren't actually relevant, or rather both dishonest or not rooted in the facts. So at this point, all of them are very clearly trying to manipulate the system for their benefit. Or, I shouldn't even say that in the case of just trying to let their political interests drive their actions, to be objective about it. What I think is, again, very important to highlight here, even if that's the case, which I think is very easy to prove, that's why they're appointed, because they're one of the other sides wants them in that position because they think it's going to benefit them. Well, we all know this. So the only thing the only honest way to engage with this, as the judge says at the bottom here, is that at the end of the day, there is a process to this. Knowing that everyone's politically motivated, the point is they can swing in and say, well, I disagree with this, I challenge that, and then they can use their mechanisms to push back on that. And if there's no legal standing, then they'll wash right over it. The point is that at the end of the day, they're using what we all know is there in every context to go after people who simply are pushing back against what they're doing in ways that you can prove, even if you agree with it. In some cases, I even do, but prove are done illegally. To try to go after judges, which this is going to blow your mind what they're doing right now. Elon Musk is literally bribing people to vote against these judges. That's whether he's right or wrong. It's incredible. That's what we see how dishonest this is at a core level. The article's entitled, Elon Musk lashes out at U.S. judges as they rule against Doge. So it says, in the days after a federal judge ruled Elon Musk's dismantling, hardly dismantling USAID, but that's how they're all framing it. Days after his moving things around of USAID, And the judge ruled that was likely violated the Constitution. The world's richest person, again, there's debate on that, but Elon Musk issued a series of online attacks against the American judiciary, offered money to voters to sign a petition opposing activist judges, and called on Congress to remove his newfound legal opponents from office. It says, quote, "This is a judicial coup. Impeach the judges," he says. Now, a judicial coup is just an insanely childish way to frame this. Yes, they're disagreeing with you, and yes, they could be driven by their own political views, but everybody's in that category. And the reality is that they're going through the legal the process. Nothing they're doing is illegal. They just don't like they're pushing back. And look, my point is, again, if they're pushing back with an unfounded reason, then call that out. Point to why they're doing it. Don't just broadly claim they don't like it because activists, Democrats, because you know they're doing that to appease the lowest common denominator. It is the loomers of the world, the people that throw out the most vile, disgusting things, knowing that there's a base down there who love it because they love hate, they love aggression, they love conflict. Those people eat it up. I really don't believe that's the majority at all, but it's a lot of people. So when he comes out and just goes, they're doing it because they know they're going to get the rabid following that rushes over the top, that starts carrying out action and could get petitions going. And sure, let it all. That's the reality of it. It's going to happen. The point is, hopefully, it's something. If it doesn't actually see any momentum, like let's just say there's not enough people to actually make this happen, the question is, what do they do? Either way, it's quite obvious that the wrong entity in all of this, in the context of how they're doing it, is the Trump administration. I mean that in the sense that they could do this in the legal way. Stand up and go look at what they're doing. Here's what we did. Here's what the ruling claims. Here's what their pushback says. And then make a case. Make it a big deal and prove in court that they're doing this. Now, yes, that takes time, but that's the reason the system is there, because there will always be a person trying to run roughshod over the rest of them. So right now, that's them. And it says Musk, who serves as a senior advisor to Donald Trump, posted about judges who ruled in opposition to the administration more than 20 times in 48 hours. Because, of course, the reality is to make that the conversation. If he just constantly, that you see it, he posts about things, the most influential person on the planet, it seems, over and over and over all day, that becomes the conversation. It takes the air out of the room. He says, while Musk posts online, he is also directing some of his immense wealth towards those who support his cause. Musk donated funds to 7 Republican members of Congress. Now, that alone to me seems crazy. The idea that he is donating money, or rather giving money, that's the same like with AIPAC or gun lobby. It's bribery, guys. Just because we pretend lobbying should be illegal in this country. I've said that forever. The idea is that what we're talking about is him donating, giving, bribing Republican members of Congress who called for impeachment. He says he's donated to those who have called for impeachment. So what he's showing people is like, look, I'll give you lots of money if you're on my side. I mean, if he was just a random oligarch, well, that's how this broken country seems to work, even though it shouldn't. He is currently a member of the government. Advisor or not, he's a member of the current Trump administration, and he's literally dumping money into Republican hands who are on his side. That's insane. Can you even imagine what they would be saying if it was a Democrat doing that? You know exactly what they'd be saying. And it says, given the maximum allowable donation of $6,600. Yeah, it's not a lot of money, but it's something. And he's literally dumping money, thousands of dollars, into the hands of people who are taking his side. I guarantee you there's Republicans that are going to go, it doesn't mean it. That's a small amount. Yeah, and what would you be saying if it was Biden doing it to people in Congress? Don't lie to yourself. Now, it says Musk also launched a petition on Thursday against activist judges, which, again, they have not even tried to prove that every single one of these people are, one, doing something that's even remotely illegal, or two, that they are actively doing this because of their political views. Now, again, I would never debate that. I think all of them do. But the way that everything they do today is a broad stroke. Broad brush. They say all of them activist judges. Everyone's a Democrat. Now it says via his political action group, America PAC, they launched these petitions, which offered registered voters in Wisconsin $100 if they signed this. How in any way is that legal? You're literally saying, sign this for me. I'll give you $100. Do you remember when they had this big conversation about, like, here's the actually funny part about this, and it's scary in every way. The Republicans could not stop talking about how Democrats were trying to bring in voters, illegal immigrants, to buy voters, essentially, right? Even though every time, I think there's a point at the end I might make as well, I make the point, guys. I continue to make this case. It is not as cut and dry as saying every illegal voter or every illegal immigrant is going to vote for a Democrat, especially since the reality is it is still illegal. Now, yes, there are ways around that, but the reality of the numbers are pretty, ask Grok if you want. Even Grok will tell you the same thing. It's basically minuscule in the reality of it. The point, though, nonetheless, is you can still prove that that's even changed, whether they want to vote Democrat or Republican. Trump himself made that big case during his last administration or the election about how we got all these Hispanic voters. Okay, so the point is that they're trying to make the case that they bribed them all by bringing them into the country. Okay, then what did Musk do? He turned around and literally started paying people to vote against certain things. You remember this. We talked about it in the conversation 4 months ago. No, let me see, what's the date today? No, it was more than that. The point, it was right before the selection process, and they were literally bribing people to take certain action. So he said, well, isn't that hypocrisy? Now, again, you see them doing the same thing. They're literally paying for votes, guys. And it says Musk PAC has funneled millions of dollars into the state's April 1st Supreme Court race, in which he is backing a former Republican attorney. Again, funding people running for power structure. He is part of the government. Can you imagine if Biden was dumping money into the hands of people who are running for positions? You guys would lose your minds, and you should. Shouldn't matter what side it's on. Now, it says the White House's fight with judges escalated to the point where John Roberts, the Supreme Court Chief Justice, issued a rare public statement on Thursday defending the justice system. Now, again, people will choose to disregard one thing or the other because they think one person's on the other side. It shouldn't matter who's saying it in the context of whether it's factual. And he says, for more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. He says the normal appellate process exists for that purpose. Like every other conversation, they have laws to deport illegal aliens. So why do they then initiate some wartime act? There's a reason for these things. Now, look at the things that are happening. Elon Musk is politically motivated. It's impossible to argue that what they're doing is not politically motivated. Listen, you could even call them an activist. It does not change the reality that all it comes down to is a disagreement from a judicial ruling disagreeing with what they're claiming. And then they have the process, as he says, to push back on that. They're using this, potentially from all sides, to roll in something new, like everything else. Now, Musk, of course, responded by saying, for more than 2 centuries, there has never been such extreme abuse of the legal system by activists pretending to be judges. Now, what's hilarious about that is, are you really pretending in 2 centuries there's never been a more extreme abuse of the legal system? Now, of course, then he made it by activists pretending to be judges, very specific. Well, that's because there's not, a lot that needs to be verified there. Are they activists? Are they pretending to be judges? Were they wrong in what they did? No, I wouldn't even disagree with the reality that what we have right now is a very, very, very broken system for reasons just like that. The absolute last thing you should do is start removing people from the system in the interest of consolidating power for your direction. Now, again, my opinion, get rid of all of it. But you see, that's not at all what's happening. They're getting rid of the parts that resist their direction and what they want to accomplish in every sense. And then they're rolling out your great reset technocracy right under your nose if you're paying attention. He says, impeach them. I'm sure plenty agree with that. At the end of the day, you're calling to impeach somebody for simply disagreeing with a political leaning, when in many cases, if not all, you can prove what Trump and Elon are doing are in fact illegal, are in fact a violation of their legal ability as the president's office. It's very simple. Musk has also received support from foreign leaders that have attacked their country's judiciaries. I found this really interesting. And they've challenged the rule of law. You might find that, actually, the first one's about Netanyahu. So, of course, right? It says he responded with an 100% emoji from a post from Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu that claimed, quote, when a strong right-wing leader wins an election, the leftist deep state weaponizes judicial system. Of course, you know why he's saying that? Because you can take half a second to look up what both left and right media are saying about that in that country. That he has destroyed the system. He has destroyed, even more funny about that is that the main point about why the ICC and ICJ can't go after them is because they have an independent judiciary, literally the opposite as everyone has ruled, including very prominent judges from around the world, that they've destroyed it by doing what they've done in this country, in Israel, which is consolidate. By the way, exactly what Trump and Elon are trying to do. Consolidate power at the top of the pyramid, basically break down every rule of check and balance, and then just run roughshod over the entire system, which is what people in Israel are saying, which is why Netanyahu is seconds away from going to prison for multiple indictments. He had another scheduled hearing about it. And guess what? It got postponed because they went back to war with Gaza, which is the way they set up the legal system in that country now post this reality, so he can never go to jail. As long as he's in power, as long as he keeps bombing Gaza, which seems to never want to stop, he'll always be out of the, that's the reality here. So citing Netanyahu or other saying that he's gotten support from people that are doing the same thing, you just need to stand back and look at what's really going on. That they're using things that they know we don't like to usher in their consolidation of power. Now, Netanyahu attempted in 2023 to weaken the power of Israel's judiciary, prompting nationwide protests and fears of constitutional crisis. Now, of course, that's the way The Guardian frames it, because in a larger sense, they also have interest in maintaining larger narratives. The reality is they have destroyed that country's process. And if you listen to Israelis, the vast majority agree with what we are saying on this show. Now, they may disagree on why it should happen, whether it's for the people they want home and they don't care about people in Gaza or not. We are all saying the same thing right now. And yet your government and the people blindly following it are ushering you in the wrong direction with the vast, vast minority behind them. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, minority. I have to make sure I didn't say majority, which is very clear to see. The world sees the genocide ongoing. Now, on top of that, interesting, El Salvador, where President Bukele's party ousted, guess what, all the Supreme Court judges in 2021 as human rights groups warned about a slide into authoritarianism. He has broken and become a repeated point of comparison for Musk. He retweeted a post from Bukele on Tuesday and claimed that U.S. is facing a judicial coup and repeated the language himself in later posts. Interesting. So you're leaning in with a guy that literally removed all of the Supreme Court judges. You know, not very dissimilar to what they did in Honduras, right? When Prospero wanted to take over, they want their technocratic hellscape they're taking over the country with. And what they do? Well, they illegally overthrew the country. And then even from there forward, they couldn't get what they wanted, so they removed half the judges. And then they got what they wanted. Guys, there's a consistency to what they're doing. You can call it a technocratic takeover. You can call it an authoritarian takeover. You're literally watching them lean into the most obvious examples of villains in the world. Everywhere you look, whether it is Andrew Tate or McGregor or everywhere you look, they're leaning into the people that are objectively disgusting, people that are raping, people that are, you can go down the list. Right now, this is the group we're going to get to in El Salvador, the government that just took people illegally into their prison system, from which they likely will never return, whether they're illegally breaking the law or not. We'll get into that. Is that do you want that to happen in this country? Is that what you think? That's what he's leaning into. It's not hard to see. And it says the only way to restore rule of the people in America is to impeach judges. That's what Musk said. How stupid is that? So see, everything is rooted in the idea that we do this thing and we'll restore what we need to restore. And tomorrow it'll be a new thing we need to break down to restore power to the people. It just feels, he says, this is what it took to fix El Salvador. Same applies to America. It's not even hidden, guys. He's literally telling you what we need to do is what they did there, where they basically turned it into an authoritarian country where there's nobody to check the power structure. Is that what you want? Is that what this country needs? It's not America first. It's power first. Now, we just talked about on the 19th, the U.S. government war on American rights. Now, I wanted to follow up on this in regard to specifically the El Salvador Venezuelan overlap. Oh, and I wanted to point this out. Somebody posted this, but I think it's funny because it relates to what we're talking about. There's no shortage of people that will willingly or maybe not intentionally just completely misrepresent what we're actually saying. Now, if you remember our conversation about the argument that Biden, auto pen or whatever that we're making about now, if you remember what I said, obviously that matters, especially if you're arguing that he didn't sign them at all, which is what they're trying to insinuate while not saying that, because there's a game they always play like that. Let you assume what you want. Clearly that would matter. As I said last time, this guy didn't listen or didn't care. Which is that, yes, it would matter if any president wasn't actually signing these things. My point was, all they're claiming is that he used an auto pen, whatever that means, like a stamp, I guess. There's different ways you could argue that, but we'll read the thing in a second, meaning that it's not him signing it, but the argument is it's still him using something. Fine. The argument is a stamp or something, but the president's still doing it. Now, legally speaking, yes, look it up for yourself. That would absolutely still be valid. Trump simply said out loud that would be null and void, so people like this are jumping on that bandwagon. I didn't say it doesn't matter. I said clearly that it would be inconsequential if your argument is that he simply used a stamp, because legally that would still be valid. My point is that right now we're going to get into a conversation I think is fascinating about whether Trump actually signed the what is it again? I'm just forgetting. I keep forgetting it. The Alien Enemies Act. Now, this is an interesting, actually a very valid conversation, not just because of this ridiculous AutoPen point, but about in the sense of whether, the insinuation that he didn't do it. If the president doesn't sign something and somebody else does, obviously that's relevant. Now, this is what he says here. The president's signature is the only thing that matters. That's the power of the presidency. And if it's automated, the president will become irrelevant. Well, that's not entirely true. Automated meaning he's not there. I agree. If it's him doing it, again, there's already precedent for this. It says you really missed the point of things when you're off in the weeds. Well, you missed what I was saying entirely, so I dispute that somebody's in the weeds at least. But it says if Trump didn't sign the Alien Enemies Act proclamation, who or what did? Okay. Now, this is a different conversation, and you'll see why. Interesting that right at the same time they're calling out Biden for claiming he used an AutoPen, which they'll address in this article, there comes a conversation like this. Now, it says Donald Trump told reporters Friday evening that he did not sign the controversial proclamation invoking the Alien Enemies Act to quickly deport migrants his administration says are violent gang members from Venezuela. So what did happen? Now, this is a very real conversation. He very publicly said he did not. Then it's been disputed as they claim, well, I'll read it because it's actually insane they're making this argument. It's just the way they try to, it's not partisan or it's not unique to left and right or one or the other. They all do it, which is they cover for their person as best they can. It says, so what did happen? Did Trump misspeak? Is he trying to deflect responsibility? That's what I actually think this is, for a decision under heavy legal scrutiny by suggesting he was merely following through on an idea proposed by Rubio. And if he didn't sign it, who or what did? Now it says, I don't know when it was signed, but because I didn't sign it. Now it takes a special kind of willful ignorance to pretend that he was talking about anything other than the one he just signed or that somebody did. Now it says, quote, other people handle it, he continues. Marco Rubio's done a great job and he wanted them out. And we go along with that. We want to get criminals out of our country. Now, this is one of those things that I always think is important to highlight on, even though it's a smaller thing. This is deliberate dishonesty. And I'll show you why. It says Trump's signature appears on the actual document, which you can see here for yourself. That is his signature. Here it is, just in case you want to look at it on Wikipedia. That is his signature, which, by the way, it's weird. You can take the PNG right there. But that is him, very clearly. And this is the document included for you to look at. So his signature is there. Trump's signature appears on the digital image available for viewing at the Federal Registrar, the government repository of official documents. The White House Communications Director, Stephen Chung, said late Friday that Trump did personally sign it. Okay, so what's going on? He says, but rather than say that the president misspoke, Chung said Trump's claim that he, quote, didn't sign it was a reference to the law passed 227 years ago, and not the more recent document. An explanation immediately questioned on social media, given that reporters had specifically asked about the newer proclamation. I mean, are we really this dumb? Are we really going to let such a blatant, dishonest thing? Like, if you support these people, then you should be calling that out. Because clearly, when he says, I don't know when it was signed because I didn't sign it, well, are we confused that you might have possibly signed a 1792 document? Pretty sure we're not that stupid. Then he goes on to say other people handled it. Are you still talking about the old document? But Marco Rubio's done a great job. Is Marco Rubio involved with the 1700 document? No. Okay. And he wanted them out, and we go along with that. Still, this is the same sentence. So if you're going along with that and he wanted them out, how could we possibly be talking about the act that was signed in the 1700s? We want to get criminals out of our country. Okay. So the reality, guys, anybody with a brain cell already knows that he meant to say and did say, I didn't sign that act. So why would he say that? I think it's quite obvious. It's just Occam's razor here, guys, because he's aware that there's a huge pushback here and potentially a very real legal responsibility. So Rubio did it. Now, it gets better when Rubio aggressively points to Trump. But it says President Trump was obviously referring to the original Aliens Enemies Act that was signed back in 1798. They really think you're this stupid. And it says the recent executive order was personally signed by Trump, because we know that already, that designated Tren de Aragua as a foreign terrorist organization in order to apprehend and deport these heinous criminals. Now, also very telling right there, in order to. I agree. And that was a point that I was going to make before I read this, which is the reason they designated them terrorists is because that was the only way they could make the flimsy argument they have to rush them out of the country. Now, I don't mean in the sense of what could normally be done because they were illegal aliens. Yeah, they should be deported. But in the way they did so. in a rapid, broad stroke, very little investigation, which is the reality, and you could prove that. Some people who are based on the evidence we can see aren't even part of the gang. In some cases, it seems not even illegally here. So the point is that by broad stroking, oh, they're all terrorists. Well, then you could simply turn back and say, well, we were under the threat. It was national security. They know what they're doing. That's why they do this. They call whatever they want a terrorist when they go after whatever they want to go after. Now, it says many of the migrants deported have no criminal records in the United States. Now, I also would dispute that. If you know they're here illegally, then technically that is breaking the law. But we also argue, and I'm not defending the Washington Post, because I do argue that's probably why they're saying it like that, because they have an agenda too. But overall, criminal record it's a stretch to say it like that when you know somebody has simply come in here legally. Especially with, as we know, which I'm not defending, a lot of the Democrat conversation is allowing that. Right, is trying to find ways to do so. Like under Biden's administration, they brought people in. Right. So again, I understand from a Republican perspective, they would argue that that's not the right thing to do. But nonetheless, the current presidency did do so. So that is the legal reality. So then if you were going to go back and stop that, you would go through the legal process of doing so. It's like the pardon game they're playing now. Right. So none of this means anything, apparently, if they just get to wash this stuff back and forth. Now, the reason he removed those pardons, remember, is because he said it was an auto pen. Interesting time to have this conversation, isn't it? Because even then, the reality legally would be that if it was Biden that did it in whatever context, it would still be legally real. But it says, the last point on that, the no criminal record, is let's remember that there is a process. Do not forget that. I'll show you this next in a second. Even if you're here illegally, you have due process, according to our Supreme Court, according to the Constitution. Which now I see even people like Alex Jones and Trump trying to make arguments about why that's not how it actually applies. Yes, it does. It's very clear. And so too has Republican and Democrats judges ruled repeatedly, consistently. So if you disagree, then you can do your best to change that legally. The reality is that is the law. But guess what? They don't care about that, as he's made clear many times. The administration said in court records that the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement investigated each migrant to verify their ties. Guys, we can prove that's not true, both from the words of the people investigating this or the people involved, as well as the evidence that we can see. Seeing as how clearly there are cases of people that right now the evidence being presented by their lawyers shows that they're not members of the gang. Now, regardless, the point is maybe they're trying to hide it or lying. That's why there's due process involved. Because the reality is we'll never find out if we don't ever get to see this process fleshed out. And why is that not chilling to Americans? You just blindly trust the government to tell you who they're removing for the reason they told you? Yeah, because the government's never lied to us about doing something illegal, right? It says the confusion over Trump's signature prompted some speculation that perhaps the document was signed using an auto pen, a machine that uses real ink to duplicate a human signature. The Department of Justice has said that auto pen is a legal way to sign official presidential documents, but Trump has ridiculed the practice as inauthentic. So you see where this goes? So I'm not even getting into whether I think that makes sense, whether I think an auto pen should be legal. The reality is, according to the State Department, the Justice Department, the current Trump administration, that's what we're talking about, says that is a legal way to do that. So if you disagree, then pass legislation to change that or speak out about it. The point is that you can't then pretend that it's not justifiable or a legal act because Trump says so. This is not some dictatorial decree where he can just speak out loud and whatever he says becomes the reality. It wasn't that way with Biden or Obama or Bush or Trump. It's not the reality, guys. But now, like I showed you with that person commenting, it is because Trump said so. So it goes on to say many administrations, including Trump's, have relied on an auto pen. Whatever you think about that. Though the current president has said that he uses it, quote, only for very unimportant papers. Okay, so Trump also uses an auto pen. Whoever that commenter was, are you starting to recognize why that was kind of ridiculous, or anybody pushing back on this because Trump said? He literally just said that he does do that. Yeah, only for non-important ones. Okay, well, from a point of principle, it's the same thing. If you can't do it, then you shouldn't be able to do it. Why would you only do it on small things if it's somehow illegal? The point is, you already know it's actually not. He's trying to get momentum to remove whatever he wants you to support. Now, it says over the past week, Trump has criticized former President Joe Biden for using an auto pen on serious government matters, declaring the documents he used null and void. Now, certainly, if there was somebody else behind that auto pen, then we should know. Prove it. I'd love to see that. I would talk about it all day. On top of that, if you think it was even an actual auto pen, you should also prove that, shouldn't you? But all they do is just scream claims, and these sycophant followers on left and right go after it as if it's real, whether defending it or arguing against it, without even caring to look if it's even something we can prove. It's floated narrative, and they let you guys rabidly fight each other, including official presidential pardons of members of staff and House committee. Right? I was one of the early. Everybody should have rightly said, "How can you possibly pardon Fauci for things unknown things?" It's absurd. And I think that's probably why they did that one. So this one, it's all these things are always being set up like this, to where they create a justifying reason for you to accept something that you wouldn't otherwise accept. Who knows if that's the case here? The bottom line is facts matter. Here we are. Where now it's interesting that he's claiming he didn't sign it. Now, Trump's comment Friday night was in response to questions about a hearing earlier that day on the legality of the deportations, during which U.S. District Judge James E. Boasberg asked why the proclamation was, quote, essentially signed in the dark, so that deportation flights could begin immediately. Well, we know why, because obviously they knew what they were doing was going to be legally challenged. That's why they didn't show anybody. That's why they declared them a terrorist organizations, to give them some level of backing. And it says the White House had announced the proclamation was signed. Proclamation signing after preparations to deport 137 Venezuelan migrants had already begun. And that's the whole thing about it being in the air while the judge ruled against it. There's a reason they did it like that, guys. It's very clear. Asked on Friday if he would authorize flights that night, despite the court order to halt them, the president deflected and said it would be up to Rubio. So this is very clear to me. You can decide for yourself. Right now, it seems that those two are basically pointing at each other. It says, quote, I would say that I'd have the Secretary of State handle it because I'm not really involved in that. That's what he said. But the concept of getting bad people, murderers, rapists, drug dealers, these are some really bad people out of the country. I ran on that. I won on that. Is that what happened? Some of these people, like 22-somethings from Dallas that never even been to Venezuela, or the reality being that these people are being swept up with no actual due process. Rapists, murderers, and drug dealers. Those things in this country we used to pretend should be proven, or that you can face your accuser, evidence presented. Yes, even to illegal aliens. But it says he also formally designated Tren de Aragua as a formal terrorist organization. I already commented on it. That's why. Then it says, under the president's direction, this is Rubio, his administration invoked the Alien Enemies Act to initiate the removal of hundreds of dangerous members of what they claim are this gang, without proving that. A vicious and violent foreign terrorist organization. Yes, because you've recently done that. Which, guys, the fact terrorist has become a meaningless word, just like anti-Semitism at this point. Because whatever they want it to become, they call it that. I'm not pretending for a second these groups are something we should ignore. But to call a gang a terrorist organization, it just makes it meaningless. But it says, which has been threatening our nation, conducting irregular warfare and terrorizing Americans. Not really. Not in the way that what they continue to highlight, even like the Aurora city. Isn't this weird how this begins? They built this Aurora story on very clearly false. There was some evidence to the idea of different points. The people in that area were clear that it was not what they were claiming, that these rundown buildings were already run down before blah, blah, blah. We went over this all in the past. Yes, there is a gang member presence in that area. Very clear. But they built this whole narrative, and all the sycophant Elon Musk circling Twitter conversation became crazy. And then a lot of it wasn't true, right? We went over this already. And now this happens built on that idea. How do you not see this building together? But it finishes by saying this crucial step would have never happened under the other U.S. president. President Trump is following through on the promises he made to the American people. So 3 times in there, Rubio says Trump did this and he started it and he's responsible. And what's Trump saying? I didn't sign it. Rubio has it. He's the one in control. He's the one that makes the job. Clearly, in my opinion, they're both trying to pass the buck to each other. Now, I really want to reiterate the fact that Trump says, I don't know when it was signed because I didn't sign it. So that one of two things. Either Trump is trying to pass the buck or he didn't sign it. Either one is actually very relevant, and I think for very different reasons that are very valid to consider. Especially since they're currently completely ignoring American, just constitutional rights. Now, I'll include that for you. Check it out for yourself. Now, here's another development that we showed this one last time. And this one here, actually, the Trump administration admitted last night that many of the people sent, this is in an affidavit, you can read the link for yourself, that many people sent, and this is why I was already saying this, despite them in newer articles claiming, which is what they always do, Rubio comes out and just gives you the narrative, just like Israel does every day. And it says, the Trump administration admitted last night that many of the people sent to do hard labor in a Salvadorian prison are people with no criminal record, other than, in some cases, being there illegally. Now, it's just, again, the point is always, they would still have a right to due process. Stunningly, they argue that because they don't know much about these people, they are justified denying them due process. And here it says, these men were sent to do hard labor in a Salvadorian prison with no due process, a tattoo artist seeking asylum. So that's the other part of this. On one of them, or many of them, in fact, they already had asylum dates set. Now, you realize asylum is a very real and legal process. Now, yes, I could guarantee you it's abused, but so too is everything. They're abusing their side of this process, guys. The point is that clearly there is a valid reason for people from Venezuela to seek asylum. Their people is still to this day are struggling due to what the U.S. government has always been doing and is continuing to do in Venezuela. Whether people are starving, whether they're struggling, whether they can't. The point is that their lives in many cases have been destroyed because of U.S. foreign policy. That does matter, despite whether or not you want to acknowledge it, as they use your tax dollars in other places. Down the line, those places will be looking at this country as the responsible character for what's going on in their lives because we allow this, or rather they use our names without us even allowing it in many cases. But overall, if they had an asylum date set, the idea that without any real due process or investigation, they just dump these people in another country, most of which aren't even from El Salvador or had ever been, is so wildly over the top. That's why I think they're trying to pass the buck right now. A teen who got a tattoo in Dallas because he thought it looked cool. That's why I think the 22-year-old, the mom's like, the point is you don't know for sure because they didn't get due process. Most of the people that want to assume are going to say, well, he's probably just lying about it. Yeah, by saying that, you mean you don't know and you're okay not knowing, which is terrifying. A 26-year-old whose tattoos his wife says are unrelated to the gang. Now he also gets into the reality of an individual who, it says, the Trump administration acted in open defiance of a judge's orders. That was about the people flying while they had said to stop it. It says they were sent without vetting. This is illegal and inhumane. Just an example of, there's one here. I'm going to just skip to the point I wanted to highlight. There's a whole bunch of like caption tweets and that. Just look for yourself about the ongoing conversation. This is a new affidavit that's worth you looking at. Sworn declarations filed last night. And this was filed on the 20th, or rather the 19th. Confirmed the Trump administration sent innocent people to rot in prison in El Salvador, including a professional soccer player tortured by Maduro regime who entered this country legally to seek asylum and has no criminal record in either country. So this is just like we've been seeing so far, guys. And here's the affidavit. You can read it for yourself. The point is that they misrepresented what appears to be a football tattoo because the guy was in the wrong place with the wrong skin color with ink at the wrong time. How many others are like this? And what he's saying is it's just sworn declarations filed in court. So you could always argue they're lying, but we already have enough evidence to show that they were barely even fleshing this stuff out. Now, whether you think that just because they're here illegally, they should be thrown in some kind of Guantanamo Bay style Salvadorian prison from which they'll never return. I mean, that speaks a lot about who you are as a person. Sure, they're breaking the law. There's already a case for that. There's already a process for that. Deport them. For them to be rounded up and sent to some crazy prison from a country they've never been at. I mean, guys, how do you not see how alarming that is? Then realize that in this case, this person's not even breaking the law in any sense. This is the immigration attorney for Jerez Reigns Barrios, born in January 16, 1989. March 24th, he marched in 2 demonstrations in Venezuela protesting Maduro. Shortly after his release, he fled to the United States. Now, here's the interesting part about this. Do you remember us talking about this during that time? Now, it's also worth questioning whether he was tortured by Maduro. Certainly, I would not balk at any government doing such a thing, but it's worth wondering whether there's more to the story. But my point is, during the conversation with Venezuela, during Trump's last administration, what did they do? Not only with Guaido and the effort to try to overthrow the government, they told Venezuelans, come to the United States. Marco Rubio said, come to the United States, come to the United States. You know, now while they're screaming about illegal immigration, they literally said, come, we'll keep. Many of them that did show up, they refused, which was just, it showed you the time they were just abusing the narrative, but some of them did end up in the country. So what's crazy is that now this is one of the people that were deported, even though he came when they invited him into the United States. Now it says he said he registered with the CPB in Mexico, then presented himself to the officials on the day of his appointment. He was taken into custody and detained at the facility. He applied for asylum, withholding of removal, just trying to jump to the main point. He was deported to El Salvador with no notice to counsel or family. It was not until March 18th that counsel was able to reach an ICE official. He's a professional soccer player in Venezuela. He has never been arrested or charged with a crime. So realize he was granted asylum in this country. So he's legally here, regardless of what they like about that, who's no criminal record and is not actually part of the gang. This guy has been deported to El Salvador. Now, this gets so much more terrifying when you understand what that means if you haven't yet recognized. It says, why experts fear the men who were sent to El Salvador's mega prison may never make it out. Now, we already kind of talked about this. Here's what it says. Hundreds of Venezuelans who were deported to El Salvador from the United States in recent days could face long or indefinite detention in a prison system rife with human rights abuses, according to attorneys and experts on the region. Their families and lawyers fear there will be no recourse for them to return to the United States for scheduling immigration hearings, scheduled, which they already had, or even return to their native Venezuela. All while those who spoke to NBC News continue to insist their loved ones and clients have no criminal histories or gang ties. Well, we don't know because they never gave them due process. Quote, we have no idea if there's any legal process by which we can challenge this, either in El Salvador or the United States. And Lindsay, however you say the last name, Tokzalowinski, at an attorney who represents the Venezuelan man in his early 30s who is seeking asylum from prosecution for being gay and for his political activism against Maduro. It says this is the great, and I believe this is the age is, I think the age points it out. I think that they're different. I think the other guy's older. It says this is the grossest human rights violation I've seen. Now, you already know how things like this will trigger certain partisan reactions. You know, it just shows you the kind of disgusting people we're dealing with today. And I do not believe that's the majority of people in this country. It says she and other attorneys said they have been completely unable to reach their clients and fear that they have disappeared into a prison system notorious for mass detentions, abuse, and a lack of process. I mean, this is a publicly discussed conversation, guys. That's why people like Netanyahu, and they praise these people. This is not what we've ever pretended we represent in this country. Now, we also talked about Mahmoud Khalil on the 13th and since then, and it's the same kind of conversation, especially since we went over the Megyn Kelly and Glenn Greenwald discussion last time. I mean, and their best response is, well, he's clearly a radical. Well, UNRWA, clearly, no, not clearly. You're not a journalist. If you're saying stupid things like that, you should be embarrassed to call yourself a journalist. That is subjective partisan assumption. Nothing they've claimed has been proven because it's not true. He does not represent that group. He was the mediator for all of them in the conversation because all sides respected him. That's a publicly proven fact. He does not see, not once in any provable way has he ever claimed to support Hamas, whether you want to assume that or not. They literally deported this guy based on the argument that he was a terrorist supporting terrorism. And he's a green card holder, not a visa holder, despite them reiterating that every time, even in their conversations with the Department of Homeland Security, that could not answer a question about what he was actually guilty of. It's just wild. So yes, a green card holder in particular should very much, but the point I should even say it like that, all of them, anybody in this country, which I'll show you right now again, does have the right to due process. I'll come back to it. This is Scalia, Reno versus Flores. Very clearly saying it matters, especially in deportation. It's just sad that they're using this to rush forward on a lot of different things. And all of this is undeniably for one country. Now, Donald Trump just said this. I look forward to watching the sick terrorist thugs get 20 years jail sentences. Now, you might, for podcast, you might be assuming we're talking about El Salvador Venezuelans, right? No. He goes on to say, for what they are doing to Elon Musk and Tesla. Perhaps they could serve them in the prisons of El Salvador, which have become so relentlessly famous for such lovely conditions. He's literally joking about the horrid place they just sent innocent people to. One of which was legally in this country. Who knows how many more? Hundreds of people they sent, guys. He's making a joke about it. He's threatening Americans, whether a joke or not, with the idea of going to a place that you know is disgusting and horrible and a human rights violation, and it doesn't matter, you're making a joke out of it, while threatening Americans because they go after Elon's cars. I mean, guys, there's nobody who is actually honest at this point who can, if you don't recognize why that is bombastically dangerous, and this is terrifying to me that there's anybody out there. And the reason I'm even saying this today, because I know people in my close circle who are taken by this stuff, who 30 seconds ago would wax intellectual for hours about the importance of the Constitution and are now going, yeah, get rid of those Democrats. I don't understand it unless we're talking about something much darker and deeper than just propaganda. Just a Thought says every American who cheers this on increases the likelihood that they themselves, their friends, their family, and their neighbors may one day end up in a prison in El Salvador. They don't even see it. Now, of course, what you're going to get, what you can look for yourself, is people going, oh, you're just funny. You just said it to be funny. Well, you guys said that about Greenland, right? You guys said that about them, or I mean, everything that's happening. Oh, he's just trolling you. No, pretty sure you're being trolled, whether you realize it or not. That's terrifying. And yes, very much actually said. Perhaps they could serve in the prisons of El Salvador. Now realize there's no debate here. We're talking about Americans. Not even verifiably Democrats, by the way. Nobody's cared to prove the vast majority of this. Some of them are, I think, arrested. And even then, I haven't seen any real fleshing out of what they really believe. The point is, it's irrelevant. It's a crime. Charge them with a crime. They're trying to use their own personal feelings, their own subjective emotions to, I mean, this is what it looks like to have an emotionally driven child who is carrying out from the highest levels of power, personal justice against people they don't like. Oh, which, by the way, is pretty much every president from before this. But it's not unique to Donald Trump, but it's very, very clumsy and obvious when he does it. Zachary Foster says, if random people blowing up Teslas for political purpose is terrorism, but Israel blowing up 20,000 Palestinian children for a political purpose is not terrorism, then the word terrorism is indeed meaningless. Now, this obvious Zionist propagandist says, did Teslas kidnap innocent people? And are they still holding 59 hostages? You pathetic excuse for human being. Like, it's amazing that he still, or any of these people still think this is going to get any influence other than people that are blindly along with the agenda. No matter what, Israel's right. Because clearly, Israel has kidnapped hundreds, thousands more in every possible context. And yes, Israel still is holding tens of thousands of innocent people. You pathetic excuse for a human being. And he says, because the Palestinians are still holding hostages, torturing and starving them, are they? Can you show me one example of torture or starvation of any one of the people they've let back out? You know, the ones that are all continuing to say that they were treated kindly and fed? You absolute clown. Well, Zachary goes on to say, if you have a problem with hostage taking, but you support Israel, a country that has kidnapped and held hostage 100 times as many innocent people as Hamas on charges that they have committed a crime in the future. Oh, and by the way, Hamas, which is funded by Israel, Vivid doesn't care about that. You are the Twitter equivalent of a SHIT streak on a pair of underpants. It's just sad, you know, because these people get very clear leaning in. This platform wildly promotes this kind of content. David Icke responding to Elon Musk. Eric Schmidt says, the Tesla attacks are getting worse. The government, think about all of them continuing to lean in to this topic. Now, is that what Americans care about? Now, sure, I know your team sport politics sycophants love this, but the majority of conservatives in this country, do they want you to be aggressively focusing on vandalism? Or do they want you to fight going after deep state, you know, and reducing government and shutting down the departments you claim you're going to do? And I don't know, stopping genocide. You know, that's what everybody actually wants. So what they do is they do things like this. They use their sycophants to promote it, and they act like everyone's on the same page, which usually does kind of cow a lot of that conservative movement into that, because what else are they going to do? That's where we are right now. And he goes, arson, Molotov cocktails, bouts of gunfire. And it says, this isn't new. The left and the right, by the way, has used violence as a political tool for decades. Only one thing can stop this. In the words of Pep Buchanan, force rooted in justice and backed by moral courage. Or, you know, charging with a crime. You know, the normal thing that already exists. But no, they're going to produce some new thing, which they already have done. They already have a new task force. They already have a new laws being done. So more government to solve this problem where there's already laws to solve it. But we're slashing it all, guys. Elon says, has there ever been such a level of coordinated violence against a peaceful company? God, I really do feel sad for the people that I don't know who actually falls for this stuff. I understand not wanting to buy a product, but this is extreme arson and destruction. Yes, it's a crime. No, I don't think anybody's really disputing that these are crimes. I don't see anybody other than you same kind of sycophant followers on the left and right who are claiming this is everything or nothing. Everybody else is like, yes, it's a crime. Move on. Charge them with a crime. Why have you turned the entire conversation into we're the victim? We're the victim, because that's what they do. You can always notice that. These people always make themselves the center of the story. This is how it works. Speaking of that, we'll come back to a point in a second about that exact point. But David Icke says, and the coordinated violence by Israel on an overwhelmingly peaceful civilian population in Gaza. I understand not wanting Hamas, even through the Israeli government, even though they helped and create them. But this is extreme arson and destruction. So why do you condemn one but remain silent on the other when the other is far, far more extreme and psychotic? Or how about the endless amounts of attacks on plenty of peaceful companies that people don't like politically? It's trying to turn themselves into the victim. That's why Donald Trump did advertisements and Netanyahu stepped up and said, buy a Tesla. It seems very strange, doesn't it? Because this guy clearly does not need your money. So what's that all about? Well, you could argue it's because of just political momentum and getting you to think that they're the oppressed hero fighting for your freedom. But I have another thought I'll get to in a second. But this is what really upsets me. He says the worst bad guys are the ones who are financing the Tesla terror campaign. The worst bad guys.
And if we don't have Elon, they could be up there a long time. Who else is going to get him? And I just want to thank him. He's going through a lot, what they're doing to him. And these people are going to be caught, and they're going to be caught, and they're going to be prosecuted. And from what they tell me, I see this just by watching your programs and reading the news, but from what they tell me, they could get 20 years in jail, and they'll get it. I'll tell you, there's going to be...
Does anybody think he's not involved? He loves to play the stupid card when it suits him. You damn well know he's being briefed on this. You damn well know that he's involved with the conversation, that he knows exactly. If you're going to try to charge people for 20 years for vandalism, you damn well know he's involved. But you got to love how dumb. I mean, people are playing. It's willful ignorance, guys. That is their bread and butter. They need you to just pretend whatever he says is true.
From what they tell me, they could get 20 years in jail, and they'll get it. I'll tell you, there's going to be no leniency, and there'll be no pardons. I can tell you that right.
And you said this morning 20 years in jail, and then maybe they get, you said this morning 20 years in jail, and then maybe they'll go to one of these prisons in El Salvador. Do you think with the way that the judges have been issuing injunctions, it would be easier or harder to send these Tesla domestic terrorists to a jail in El Salvador than these MS-13 or Trendy Arrival guys?
Well, I view these people as terrorists just like others. These are, when I looked at those showrooms burning, and those cars, not one or two, like 7, 8, 10 burning, exploding all over.
Yeah. You know, unlike the 10, 12, 40, 100 children burning to death in Gaza right now, or the many different people struggling in this country for things that all of our government have done. But we're worried about the richest man in the world's cars burning. Did you, just in case you missed what he was just saying, guys, that's not a joke. He just got point blank asked, sending American citizens to El Salvador because you consider them domestic terrorists. This is not a joke. One of two things is happening. This is a legitimate conversation that this should be chilling and terrifying, or he's floating this idea to have that effect and they're not going to do it. Either way should be outrageous to anybody that believes in the Constitution, that understands the inherent reality, the God-given reality of the Constitution, or whatever you want to call it. That's what they called it when they wrote down these inherent God-given rights that they acknowledge we all have. I mean, this is just incredible. Like this, it's one of these moments, like I almost feel like this should have been the only thing we talk about today. How insane it is that he's literally discussing the reality of sending Americans to another country because they broke a law we already have consequences for in this country. The only reason that it makes sense is because they're calling them terrorists. Gee, isn't that exactly what they just did? I don't know how any conservative could even pretend that this makes sense. Where are you guys? Stand up and call this out. I know I see plenty of you, but it's hard not to see that there is a lot of support. What I think is happening, just like with the Democrats during COVID-19, that many of you are afraid to speak up because you don't want to be called out. You don't want to feel like the one outside. Trust me, guys, if you just stand back and pull yourself out of the partisan game, you'll realize the vast majority of people are already on your side. Just lean into it.
The place.
To a jail in El Salvador than these MS-13 or Trendy Arrival guys.
Well, I view these people as terrorists just like others. These are, when I looked at those showrooms burning, and those cars, not one or two, like 7, 8, 10 burning, exploding all over the place. These are terrorists. You didn't have that on January 6th, I can tell you. You didn't have anything like that on January 6th, which is sort of a...
Yes, but here's the main point to make. You did have some violence, yes. I'm always the one to tell you that they wildly take that out of context. It was definitely not an insurrection, but on principle, it's the same thing. It's the same principle. They called them terrorists, right? Also led by the Israeli government through the idea that they were all anti-Semite Nazis with their red hats. That was from the ADL, guys. The point is, either way you look at it, the people that were pushing back on the power structure were labeled terrorists. You know how long we've been telling you this was coming? You know how long we've been telling you that they're labeling constitutionalists as domestic terrorists, that we were the biggest threat because we believe too much in the Constitution? It has been building for decades. All you're seeing is the consistency of left and right. They go after the dissidents as terrorists. See, it's amazing that, and this is what I have to believe that most of you out there understand this. The reality is that once they set this in, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, that it will become consistent and consistently used against people pushing back against the power structure. You know why that's happening? Because we're all starting to push back on the power structure. That's why we have this weird little co-opted mainstream alternative media, Trump. This is what's happening right now. Everything is about trying to cement in their control as they're losing it for good. We see it. You see it. Now they're threatening to put you in a jail in El Salvador. Don't you wonder why? It's obvious.
Terrorists. You didn't have that on January 6th, I can tell you. You didn't have anything like that on January 6th, which is sort of amazing because on January 6th, the Democrats were talking. Nobody was killed other than a very beautiful young woman, Ashley Babbitt. Nobody was killed. And you look at what's going on now with these terrorists. These are terrorists, and that's an organized event. You know, take a look at their signs.
Wait, were you going to say that they were killed on this side? Because that's not true. I guess he set himself up there with bad language setup. His whole point, well, nobody died over here. Well, nobody died over here. And in fact, there was a lot more done in the context of organized. Like, let's be clear about this. Individuals should be charged with crimes if they commit a crime. It's the same consistent principle from any conversation we've had. If you want to argue somebody broke the law, then charge them with a crime. January 6th is one of the most obviously organized false flag. I've talked about this endlessly. There was foreknowledge. We saw it set up. We knew what was coming. In Israel and Ukraine were involved. It's all very obvious. And now we're doing the same thing in a different direction. And yes, people did commit crimes. And yes, they should be charged with crimes, whether it's vandalism or destruction of property or whatever you want to call it. Some kind of grand, whatever the word to be, fill it in blank for me down there. Charge them with a felony. But to argue they should be deported and you calling them terrorists is absolutely, I mean, you could call this the beginning of the end of this country. If you don't see where this is going, God help us.
They're all made by the same sign company. A nice, expensive job. Now, these are...
He's citing the idea that they all had organized signs. Well, yeah, so do they all, guys. Every time you have any kind of movement on left and right, they're always backed by some kind of PAC or some kind of large influencer that has all the money. You all know this. So I'm tired of hearing that argument. And on top of that, guys, you know how easy it is to make a bunch of signs today for pretty nothing? You know, it's always the same argument. But that's not to say that they're not mobilized and influenced. I know that's the case in almost every context because it's always happening. But they use that without proving it, which should matter, to just make the argument that it's a coordinated Democrat attack. Do you realize they never prove any of this stuff on either side of the conversation? Trump's insurrection or this coordinated Democrat attack on Teslas? I mean, look, I know there is both happening very clearly, but you need to, I mean, if you're not demanding evidence from people who are making big claims about an entire group of people, then you're part of the problem. So if you can prove that somebody was deriving this whole thing, then they should go to jail and the people that committed crime should go to jail. The idea that they're somehow indicting half the country, which is what the Democrats, it's ignorance, guys. And it's designed, as Just a Thought was telling you, to drive you against your neighbor. So these same power structures, as Free Prince was telling you, can continue to benefit, sign $1 trillion packages and, you know, benefit their buddies.
The people that finance it are, in my opinion, in just as big a trouble as the people that are setting the match and setting the fires. So we'll see. It's under very serious investigation by the FBI and by the Justice Department. These people are terrorists.
Wow. Cool. So, you know, vandalism has now become terrorism and genocide is no big deal. Welcome to the 2025, guys. Now, I simply said, pretty sure starving and murdering children and then raping their family members in prisons and then publicly debating why that needs to continue is a tad worse than vandalism. But that's just me. Al Jazeera. Everything is legitimate. Israeli leaders defend soldiers accused of rape. Publicly on TV, by the way. Now, here is Doge designer saying Elon Musk is going to file a lawsuit against Jamal Bowman for calling him incompetent thief and Nazi. Oh, really? Cat Turd says, take every dime he has. And ladies and gentlemen, that is the woke right. Woke right. I said, did the big, bad, mean words hurt your feelings? I mean, it's just insane. How do you not see that they're the same thing? The thing, come on, man, says a new mantra of the woke right. Sue them and shut down their mean words. Feels like I've heard them rail against that outrage before somewhere, right? Obviously, it's exactly what the left was doing for a little different context. Now, I grabbed this image. I'm just going to post this now for when I see people doing this. But that's the woke right for you guys. I mean, really, you're now going to try to sue somebody for saying words against you? Now, look, slander is a real thing, okay? But saying simply to take action like this around. There are people everywhere all day calling people names, including them, by the way. Aren't they calling people terrorists right now? Aren't they calling people pedophiles right now? Yes. Elon in particular. Okay. Then if that's the same game you're talking about, well, him being a Nazi is stupid, like you calling them a terrorist is stupid. But you're both doing something worthy of criticism, right? It's the game. And they're the woke left fighting the woke right, guys. And what does it do? It drives us all somewhere else. When they want you to not pay attention to what's actually shifting around you. It's the same technocratic prison building around us that we've been showing you for a long time now. Aaron Melnick points out the president of the United States, who sworn an oath on a Bible to defend the Constitution. In fact, he didn't this time, by the way, since that is relevant. Didn't swear on the Bible, even though his wife was holding it right next to him. You could argue that was some kind of an overlap, but I think that's a reason for that. But he says the Constitution and take care, swear an oath to protect and defend the Constitution and take care that the laws are faithfully executed. He has now threatened to withhold all federal funds from Maine colleges. Why? Until the governor personally apologizes to him. I mean, this has just become a personal game. I mean, they're not even hiding anymore. Here's what he tweeted. So Ron says, Trump says he will withhold federal tax dollars to Maine colleges unless they apologize. Now, I guarantee they're trying to play the avenue where they're not obligated to give money to these colleges. And arguably, most people at this point are starting to recognize that and saying, why shouldn't be funding them at all? But he says, well, the state of Maine has apologized for their Governor Strong, but totally incorrect statement about men playing women's sports, which you know my opinions on. I very clearly think that is ridiculous. The idea that men and women should be playing women's sports or women and men, which largely doesn't happen, or vice versa. But it says at the White House Governor's Conference, we have not heard from the governor herself. And she is the one that matters in such cases. Therefore, we need a full-throated apology from the governor herself and a statement that she will never make such an unlawful challenge to the federal government again. So you speak her mind, is what he's saying, by the way, before this case can be settled. I'm sure she will be able to do that quite easily. Thank you for attention. Okay. So she says something about in disagreement of the policy. And you demand an apology about that. Now, is that an unlawful challenge to the federal government? Well, clearly right now, the way they're framing all of this is any pushback, any resistance, any disagreement, we might put you in jail. Talk about an authoritarian reality, guys. That's where this seems to be going. We're going to impeach you. We're going to threaten you with a crime. We're going to call you a terrorist. I mean, these people are showing themselves to be exactly what we've always been worried about. And if you think right now that's unique to the right or about Trump, you're not paying attention. It has been built by all of them, and Biden is one step in that process, and the next step will be whoever Trump hands it to, probably a Democrat. It's going to be clearly the continuation of the problem, and all they're doing is using things they know you don't like to drive you to accept, to literally call for your own subjugation. Now, Derek points out an article from Politico, and it says, Trump supporters, you down for this? It says Donald Trump has repeatedly floated sending American prisoners to serve prison sentences outside the country, this time for vandalizing Teslas. Here's what Politico wrote. Trump floats sending Americans to foreign prisons. Civil rights groups say that would be illegal. Well, obviously. Now, President Trump has repeatedly floated, and by the way, we just played a video for you when he was point blank asked in the Oval Office, and did he smile He straight up pushed back and said, yep, they're terrorists. And that's right. Like, that is real. Now, whether you think he's going to do it or not is a different conversation, but he straight up owned the conversation that sending Americans for vandalism or any federal crime is somehow is justified to send them to a country they've never been to, in a prison that we know violates what we understand as our rights in this country. And let's understand it, guys. The Constitution applies to you from Americans' perspective anywhere in the world. That's what they've also ruled. So the fact that he even argues that, he's making the case that if we deem you a terrorist, then these things don't matter. That is making the case that they can turn your rights on and off when they decide to. I just don't know why that's not terrifying. Donald Trump has repeatedly floated sending American prisoners to serve prison sentences outside the country. This time, and this isn't the first, threatening to people with vandalizing Teslas. Civil rights groups say the move is legal and life-threatening. Trump's suggestion on Truth Social on Friday to send the Tesla attackers to El Salvador marks an escalation of his already controversial use of foreign prisons, this time potentially targeting American citizens. Quote, there's no precedent to send U.S. citizens elsewhere outside the country to serve sentences in other prisons. I mean, this shouldn't need to be said, but in case you weren't aware of that, Trump levied the threat on who he called, quote, sick terrorist thugs. Oh, weird. Yet again, without any real process. Has evidence been presented? Have people? No. Now, I guarantee you there's going to be some political motivation here. I mean, that's my opinion. But of course, we should wait for a process. They're given due process. There should be evidence presented. They should be charged with a crime. And then we should see that flesh out. For him to call them sick, terrible thugs, well, isn't that no different than Elon Musk crying about being called a Nazi and a thief? Yeah, it's the same thing, except in this case, you can go to prison in another country for the rest of your life. And it says they've been charged with throwing Molotov cocktails and setting fire to Teslas around the country, as well as vandalizing Tesla property. Now, look, because it hasn't been fleshed out, it's also possible that some of this is being manufactured by their own people, by some other group, or very clearly being politically motivated by some Democrat-funded thing. All of that is possible. The point is, we don't know yet, and everyone's cherry-picking the thing they like to place over it. That's how partisanship works today. But the idea is around the country. So what's the likelihood that you think all of this is happening at the same time for the same reason? Or the idea that like right now, you know how easy it would be for somebody in these groups. Now, look, we're going to get to a point. I'm just going to quickly point it out because this is relevant to say it. I wonder whether there was something happening before this that justifies this effort to, I don't know, drive massive support to what seems to be a failing company, or get rid of some things that might otherwise be not sold. You have to realize that let's just say that for sake of conversation, that Democrats are bombing these things because they hate Elon. Same things you would see in reverse of people attacking because of Trump. It's the same dumb thing, or vice versa. Like Republicans going after Democrats because they did the same thing. It happens on all sides. But what if you have a Tesla company that's going, man, we're failing right now. Nobody's buying these things because that's what's been happening. The price has dropped in half. What if we just burn all these and blame it on Democrats right now? Wouldn't that benefit us? That's also a possibility. So all that is completely up in the air. I don't know anything other than what we're reporting. My point is that you have to be honest enough to acknowledge that all of those things are possible. And I'm going to come back to the point about why apparently on the 20th, Tesla had to recall almost all of the Cybertrucks that were out. Doesn't that seem quite relevant right now? Because there was a dangerous issue on the road and they had to recall them. We'll come back to that. It says the criminal charges announced Thursday came after weeks of demonstrations at Tesla showrooms protesting Musk and Department of Government efficiencies, mass layoffs. Many of the protests were peaceful, but they were instances of vandalism and arson. Okay, well, sort of sounds like the way you could frame January 6th. But these are terrorists, right? You can't miss the overlap. And this is why it's so important to recognize the actual nonpartisan position of me and TLAV and everything, because that's how you are able to stand back and see both sides of it and recognize that, well, over here, Republicans are being called terrorists when they're not. And over here, Democrats are being called terrorists when they're not. And then what does that show you? Well, the government has an interest in framing dissidents as terrorists. Pretty simple, isn't it? If you just have the wherewithal to stand back and look beyond the partisan childish game that's being played. But see, people have so many personal things worked into this. They just have a genuine hate, or they've been genuinely convinced that anybody with that mindset is part of the problem. It's the same thing you do to foreign stuff, right? Where Muslims are bad because of X, Y, and Z, or socialism or communism. Well, again, from my perspective, government is the problem. Whatever flavor you want to lay it out to. You see, if you can see that if you look. but they get you invested in one thing they want the boogeyman to be. Now, it says Trump said he hopes those charged, which includes 3 people who are accused of setting and trying to set fire to cars and charging stations, will get 20 years in prison. Well, wasn't it just Republicans that were in such a big pushback against electric cars in general and the charging stations and all of that? It's funny how these narratives just rapidly shift. Worth considering that there's an overlap here to people who might have been going after these for other reasons. And it says, quote, perhaps they could serve them in the prisons of El Salvador, which have become so recently famous for such lovely conditions, as we just read for you, that Trump cited. I mean, it's what we're looking at, guys. Doesn't that look familiar? It should. It looks exactly like Israeli prisons, which is what they're modeled after. Now, reiterating, as Megyn Kelly ignorantly tried to argue that Khalil had no due process rights because she either doesn't understand the Constitution or chooses to lie about it. May says, no, he's not free speech case. No, why? Because same point. I said, well, you're all exposing either shocking ignorance or willful deception to the detriment of all that you claim to be fighting for. Here's Anthony Scalia. Excuse me. Let's see. I have it. Where was it? Deportation. Yeah, it says Immigration and Naturalization Service Regulation, which provides, where it's not right there. Oh, shoot, there's a bunch of them. Should have taken the screen. Damn it, I had the screenshot on the last one. It is this sentence. Let me see if it's even loaded. Okay, good. Let's see. There it is. No, it says, we turn now from the claim that the INS cannot deprive respondents of their asserted liberty interests at all to the procedural due process claim that the service cannot do so on the basis of the procedures it provides. It is well established, he says, that the Fifth Amendment and the 15th, by the way, entitles aliens to due process of law in deportation proceedings. And there is an endless amount of those, and this being a Republican judge. Again, here is from this is a constitutional law website simply saying the Constitution protects all people living in the United States, regardless of immigration status. Most constitutional provisions apply based on personhood. That's why if you read them, they say any person, X, Y, and Z, not citizenship. In other words, if an individual is physically present in the United States, they are entitled to the protections granted by the Constitution, which if you understand God-given inherent, then that obviously makes sense. But see, if you believe that they're not afforded those rights, then you've already bought into the lie that the government gives you your rights, which I'm not surprised to see that there's a Republican vein in that, because clearly there seems to be an authoritarian push right now coming through that team sport side. Here's another one. The court asserted that the guarantees of protection contained in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution extend to all persons within the territorial jurisdiction of the United States, without regard to differences of race or color or nationality. Endlessly verified, and people still push back on this. And here is Elon Musk showing American flags to something wildly un-American. Today, Pam Bondi announced charges against 3 individuals responsible for violent destruction of Tesla properties. The days of committing crimes without consequence have ended, I guess, unless you're the people you like, right? Unless they're people you pardon or governments you don't care about. It's just always the same. Just when Biden would say the same dumb thing, we'd laugh because you're literally supporting genocide. These people are either children or completely monsters. Children in the sense they don't even know what they're involved in. Because the bottom line is there's people everywhere committing crimes without consequence. They're just your allies. All over this country for that matter too. There's all sorts of crimes being committed by these large companies that you work with and you guys don't care. People being polluting whether it's dioxins or glyphosate or anything else, or plenty of other actual crimes where we're being robbed from corporations, blah, blah, blah. Let this be a warning. If you join this wave of domestic terrorism against Tesla, why wouldn't you just say if you commit domestic terrorism that you'll be charged? Because they're focusing it on one personal thing. That's important to understand. The Department of Justice will put you behind bars. Oh, but apparently not. Apparently they're going to put you behind bars in El Salvador. Maybe that's why they said it like that. Well, here's what this is Nick Sorter, of course, saying Elon Musk just slammed the Democrats for violently attacking Tesla. I always thought the Democrats were supposed to be the party of empathy and caring, and they're burning down cars. Did you prove that? Are you proving this is a Democrat-run thing? No, but he's on Fox News screaming that anyway. And so by the time facts come to the table, these people have already made 45 shows about it, and it's already cemented as reality in the minds of partisanship. You know, sort of like Safe and Effective on the left. You guys are the same thing. You're the Democrats. Or rather, just the partisans. That's somebody should make a sitcom called The Partisans. That's what you guys are. But see, that's the point. He's already cemented the narrative, and people like Nick Sorter share it as journalists. We're the media now, blind, supportive, and assumptive point. We should laugh at things like this, guys. They should be made fun of. And David Size America is being prepared and primed for a massive crackdown on dissent. See, some people actually can look and see. Peaceful dissent. It started with anti-Semitism, but that is only the beginning. Violence hands the justification for tyranny to the tyrants. Problem, reaction, solution. As you can see throughout history, the crackdown is planned for everywhere globally founded by the cult blueprint. China. So, interestingly, now this is on the 20th, they're talking about this, but this had been building, guys. Tesla, which I'll show you next, quick tweet from Lee Camp, Tesla had been collapsing. The price had gone down. Yes, there's fluctuations, but had largely collapsed by almost half. People were trying to sell them in a rush because before this, it was largely Democrats that had them. Funny how that works out. And so they started selling them all, acting like they were being partisan, but you're literally calling them all pedophiles and terrorists. Why would you? It's such a funny thing that's happening. And they tried to sell them and realized they were getting half the value. And then you started seeing this kind of push. So my point is they were suffering financially from Tesla's perspective, not necessarily Elon Musk, but Tesla. So it's funny that they've literally worked up this entire thing to drive money to a group that was already failing. Don't you think it's odd that Trump does a commercial and Netanyahu comes out with a picture of a Tesla truck and says, help Elon? I mean, it's one of two things. Either that they are just desperate to support Elon Musk, or there's something else going on around these cars, which I've always said. Explain for me why any other car would not have been pulled off the market with how many crashes we saw. They're using this for something that overlaps with the larger agenda, whether that's the self-driving car overlap, which they were using to sort of map everything out. I mean, why else would they allow these things to keep crashing over the last 10 years? It happens constantly. I mean, way more than the other cars we could talk about. And even then, it's in a special category of self-driving cars. There is no other overlap. If you have a car self-driving that crashes and potentially kills people, that would not be allowed to continue, but it did. Both sides of the paradigm. So it says that Tesla is recalling 2 days ago nearly all Cybertrucks in the United States to fix an exterior panel that could detach while driving. The company said this on Thursday. Not Musk, not anybody else. The company announced this. The latest in a series of callbacks for that truck. So it's not even the first time. It is now the 8th recall. That's an 8 for these SUVs since January 2024. I mean, guys, what in the hell are we talking about? Cybertrucks have had 8 recalls. I don't even know that. Since January of 2024, that's insane. That any other product in the world would have been tossed aside by now. But there's this. Why do you think they've made it some kind of partisan political game? It says the recalled vehicles represent a vast majority of the Cybertrucks currently on the road. Now it says the recall could prove to be a setback for Tesla, whose stock has lost about half of its value just this year. In 2024, Tesla topped the list of U.S. recalls, with its vehicle accounting for 5.1 million callbacks. 5.1 million. I mean, how do you not see something going on here, guys? That's crazy. Now, Lee Camp made a good point, same kind of thing, about where this may relate. He says a very interesting thing is happening. We live in an inverted totalitarianism ruled by the anonymous corporate state. Now, he's talking about before Donald Trump's administration. He says the corporate oligarchs have long used their puppets in a government as a shield between the true decision makers and the people. I agree. The only thing the oligarchs truly fear is the 99% uniting against them. By redirecting the people's anger about their subjugation so that it's aimed at politicians, the corporate titans can remain relatively unscathed. As a politician is voted out, the true oligarchs can simply control the next replacement, and the system of exploitation and extraction continues without even a speed bump. But what has happened recently is some of the corporate oligarchs have put themselves directly in the White House. The most obvious example is Elon Musk. Many people are therefore furious with him, boycotting Tesla and causing a Tesla stock crash. His point is that, as they usually are with politicians, but this time happens to connect with him as being an oligarch and his massive wealth. Now it says Musk has lost $120 billion or more of his personal wealth just over the past month. This is posted on March 20th. Compare this to when Goldman Sachs helped crash our entire economy in 2008, destroyed the lives of millions and walked away unscathed or even richer. They understood what Musk does not. The oligarchs use the government to shield themselves from accountability, but Musk has removed the curtain. And now a large percentage of the country can see the truth. Now, whether you agree with it or not, there's nuggets of general truth in there regardless. My point is whether you see Musk that way or not. What I find interesting is that you could argue, like I've said before, that this is not some kind of oopsie Musk decided to do this, but rather that this is the decision of the power structure to step back out of the shadows. And he's right. We have up until now seen this kind of the real shadow government, the real deep state, just whatever, the unelected power structure, the unelected rulers of the world, the people that are the businesses, we all know this, have been continually funding and what the power structures. This is the first time we've seen such an say for Trump, right up next to it, the exact thing that was usually behind the curtain. Now, maybe it is. Maybe he's right. Maybe that's just them. Maybe there's a dispute between the two sides of the power structure and they just decided to jam themselves in. Or I genuinely think it's more about something very clearly shifting. That from a world global sense, they've decided this is where they're going and they don't care what you think. The difference, though, is that you can see the reaction that people are pushing back. And I'm not talking about the violence. I'm talking about just people, just people not wanting to buy his cars, people pushing back on it. Okay, overall, this clearly, look at the timing of this. When do you think the Tesla thing started? Let's just even ask what it says. See, oops, I spelled that. Let's see, just can't talk or can't type anyway. See what it says. It says, and let's see, maybe ask Grog too. The incident involving Tesla Cybertruck explosions outside of Trump. Oh, that's right. See, how interesting is that? Man, I'm telling you, there is always something. So let's not forget the Cybertruck being bombed outside of Trump's hotel on January 1st, 2025. Right after he was elected. That's and remember, there was so much around that. There was more than enough evidence to suggest there was something very clearly behind that they did not want to tell you. The coordination, they were both from the same fort, the same military base. Remember how that just got dropped? We all rushed forward. Now, all of a sudden, we have Teslas blowing up and Cybertrucks blowing up at a time when they were already beginning to see a massive decline in their, that's exactly when this started. That's crazy. Now, it could be nothing. Maybe it's just an overlapping point, but it's certainly interesting and worth your consideration. Now, of course, Alex Jones rushes out and says, standing up for Musk and Tesla is standing up for America. I just have to believe that the average person is just kind of weirded out by that. It's gross. This has nothing. You can't pretend that one person and his company is America. Or that standing up for this oligarch who is clearly influenced by a foreign government is anything America. As I said, I just don't understand why honest people fall for this. No, it is not standing up for America. It is standing up for an Israeli-purchased oligarch who is rolling out the exact same Great Reset Alex was just pretending to fight. Hashtag two-party illusion. Very important to think about. Now, whether you think Israeli oligarch or not, this is not somebody who in any way, shape, or form is fighting for anything. He's not even actually fighting for the things you claim he's fighting for. You're just saying he's doing that, and his actions are actually producing something different. Now, High Impact Flicks rightly says, any day now, I expect Alex Jones to blast the world with his new product, Musk Vitality. He's obviously kidding. 10 free bottles with every Cybertruck purchase. That's where this seems to be going. It's very strange what's happening right now. And here's what Elon posted this with no comment. It just shows you what he wants you to think about, right? No conversation about it. It's all just about the sales pitch. This is what they're talking about on Fox News. The so-called, whatever, all the rest of the left, right, all corporate media, mainstream alternative media. Here's what they're pushing.
Now, would you buy another Tesla?
I have one already on order. I already have another Cybertruck on order. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. A friend of mine in Louisiana has a Cybertruck. She loves this vehicle. I think she loves it as much as her grandkids.
You get the point. That goes on the whole time. They're talking about swastikas and he's going to get a new one and it drives great. So now apparently Fox News is doing advertisements for Cybertrucks. it's just wild to me because somebody spray painted a swastika on the back of it. I mean, think about how stupid that is. Yeah, wouldn't it be nice if all of us had enough money just throw away a car with some spray paint and to buy a brand new one? Right? These are the oligarch the people that are actually living in a very different world than you, but they desperately want you to think that you're the same. Now, as Glenn Greenwald points out, back to the things that matter, he says, I noticed much of the American right, definitely not all, but much, has a glaring Israel exception for all of their professed principles and beliefs. New York Times says Republicans once championed free speech on campus, now not so much. It's just simple hypocrisy, guys. It doesn't matter the context. It's about whether you believe in free speech or not, period. And Glenn has been calling it out. He said he would like to point to the warning that Tucker Carlson issued about the grave dangers to both free speech and the claimed values of the American right if they adopt liberal justifications for censorship and allowing Israeli exception for free speech. And then he went on to do the same things. All right, so it's lovely to give lip service to things, but it's about your actual follow through. Same thing I say about the politicians and everybody else. It's about principles, integrity, outcome. Anybody can say the nice thing one day. It's about whether you actually follow it, stay the course. Now, Miami Herald wrote this on the 19th. Most Republicans support the right to protest unless it's against Israel, poll finds. Now, I'm always the first one to point out that polls are not it's always easy to manipulate. It's a data point. It's worth considering, but it's very rarely, if ever, the full picture. But the way they did this is interesting and telling for obvious reasons. It says, in the latest Economist YouGov survey, a strong majority of GOP respondents, 73%, said they support Americans' ability to protest against actions they view as unjust. How is that possible? How is it possible? I mean, 27% of people in the GOP, very similar to Democrats, don't think you're allowed to protest things that are unjust. What in the world is that? How do you possibly, that shows you something right there. There are people that are writing down on this survey that they do not think you have the right to protest. See, that's showing you where this is all going. They demonize the other side, and you only picture that when you think about it. And so you then go, even though what you're doing, whether you agree with it or not, is undermining what you actually, in other contexts, think you're fighting for. And it says just 12% said they oppose this, and it was 12%, and 14 said they weren't sure. So 27% is ultimately, or 26, that should be 27. Maybe there's a 1% anomaly. The point is that that they're on the side of we're not sure whether you should or you don't. That's just wild to me. But here's the point. When asked if it should be legal or illegal to protest, quote, against Israeli actions in Gaza, less than half of Republicans in the United States, 42%, said it should be legal. Meanwhile, 23% said some kind of public demonstration should be illegal. 35% said they weren't sure. So clearly, the majority of Republicans who took this poll, when Israel got brought into the conversation, suddenly lost their conviction for constitutional rights. That's terrifying. And it shows you, that's plain as day. I shouldn't even need to explain what that shows you. Now, when it came to anti-Israel protests for the Democrats, well, first it said 86% of Democrats and 81% of independents said they backed the right to demonstrate. So a little bit more, 20% of both groups said they opposed, they were unsure. It's 8% difference. It's not that big of a difference. So both of them largely still understand the Constitution, with a grouping that weirdly doesn't want that to be the case. It's terrifying in its own right. Then it says, when it came to anti-Israel protests, 73% of Democrats said that should be legal. So a lot bigger percentage still said it should be legal, but still, while 5% said they should be outlawed, 22% said they weren't sure. A majority of independents who said it should be illegal. The bottom line is there's a very clear quarter of the country on either side of this. Well, rather, I guess more so if you look at the Republican side, it would be more than half. But let's just say half to a quarter of the country at least begin to balk, to quibble, to suddenly be unsure whether they want that when it has to do with Israel. How is that possible? If we are of the mind that free speech shall not be infringed, how is it these people suddenly start going, wait, maybe we shouldn't allow that one when it comes because of propaganda? Because your government, left and right, have been jamming this down your throat for decades. And yet still, I like to argue that this has gone the other direction since October 7th, but that's wild. And this is what you get from people like Laura Loomer. I say this is important because what she says out loud, which is up for you to decide, is that we have a Zionist in the White House talking about Donald Trump. What's funny about this, if you want to watch it for yourself, these people are literally having a very calm conversation with her, and she's spouting the same kind of dumb thing she always does. And then she walks away, and they quietly follow along, and they're just, they're saying, get out of here, get out of here. But no one's doing anything. No one's forceful. Here's how she frames this. Pro-Hamas protesters, no, they're pro-Palestinian, many of which they articulate that if you actually listen, swarmed me last night outside the White House when I was filming a woman carrying a Hamas flag. No, she's talking about a Palestinian flag. She's either too dumb to know that or is a liar and asked them to take their masks off. She tries to make it about the COVID overlap because she knows how a lot of very shallow-minded people will ignore the facts because they bad Democrat with a mask, even though a lot of Republicans wore them too, whatever. The point is clearly, swarmed me last night is she's doing the same victimhood thing as the rest of them, acting like I'm here and I got swarmed when she walked up to them, which you can see in other videos, and started talking to them. She is a inherently dishonest person for very clear childish reasons. She wants to shout out her narratives and get attention for it. But this is what she says. Zionist in the White House.
Or has a tough time.
Maybe we're out of here.
Spends way too much time on Twitter.
Like, we don't own this area.
Right here.
Keep on moving, keep on moving. We own the sidewalk.
We own the White House. They think they
own
own
the White House.
You see them just trying out, they're not doing anything to you. God forbid they tell you to go away. This is the desperate effort to make it into something that it's not.
So we have a Zionist in the White House.
There it is.
So we have a Zionist in the White House.
Well, I think it matters. I mean, definitely matters if you understand what Zionism is and why we should all desperately try to fight against it. But I said, are you a Zionist, Donald Trump? That's what Laura Loomer claims while desperately seeking confrontation from her race-baiting Israel first propaganda. But if Donald Trump is a Zionist, I think that should matter, right? Seeing as how most all of his cabinet seems to be proudly saying that. I've never heard Trump say, I am a Zionist. I would like to know that. Well, it's kind of easy to see what he supports when he puts people like this in positions of power. So first of all, recognize this is another one of Loomer's videos where, God forbid, people should be practicing their religion in a country where religion is free. We practice religious freedom, right? Well, Tom Homan, Borders Are, literally says this. 23 years after 9/11, we have Muslims on Islamic prayer mats, so just mats for prayer, and shouting, God is great. That's what Allah Akbar means. God is great. Outside the White House. Are you okay with this, America? I mean, do you see what they're doing to us, guys? And just to be clear again, from the left side of it, they're doing things just as extreme to drive you into a place where you don't believe in anything. If you don't understand by now that everybody has the right to religious freedom in this country, or at least we still pretend that, and that all they're doing there is practicing their religion, which people do all over these areas for Christian displays, for everything. There's Jewish displays. They do this constantly in these public areas. But God forbid they should practice their public religion. But because the bottom line is he's trying to make it Brad because Muslims attacked us on 9/11. Is that what happened? Are we still pretend? Are we Nikki Haley talking about Assad chemical gas weapon? No, this is insane. As I said, Borders Are news account asking if we're okay with people expressing their religious beliefs in a country that professes to believe in religious freedom. And he takes issue with the phrase, God is great. Are these clowns still pretending Muslims attacked us in 9/11? I mean, we have to understand how wild this is. Even if you believe that's the case, does that mean every Muslim in this country is no longer allowed to practice their religion in private or in public? I just don't know. What blows me away is how stuff like this doesn't get the kind of pushback you'd expect. This is objectively disgusting. It's at the very least objectively not what we pretend this country believes. Which you ask anybody in basic passing, do you believe in religious freedom? Oh, yes, that's foundation for this country. But then what about that? Oh, racist, terrorist. And I very much do not believe that's the majority. I just think that's insane. Now, you need to recognize that Allah Akbar means God is great. Now, just like somebody can scream, Christ is whatever. You could scream Jesus Christ while rushing in to bomb something, which, by the way, the KKK does all the time. or historically, very much so, does not then make God a bad thing. That's as stupid as saying when they say God is great in any context that that's a terrorist act because you're an ignorant person. And then recognize that what we're talking about when it comes to Islamic terrorism was quite literally created by Israel or funded by the United States and Saudi Arabia. The fact that this stuff is still pushed back on by people who can simply look this stuff up is beyond me.
Certainly the Zionists have used it and brought it, in fact, to the area. Terrorism, as we know it today, the planting of bombs in marketplaces and so on and so forth, was, in fact, introduced into the Middle East by the Zionists in the 20s. But the net result of Zionist terrorism and violence in the first third of the 20th century has brought forth, to my mind, the anomaly, the horrific and unacceptable status in the Middle East today of the State of Israel, which is in fact an armed garrison state, which now exports more arms and distributes violence all around the world, vastly disproportionate to its size. I mean, in that respect, I think it's a horrible cycle of violence. But in it all, I think the Palestinian is the victim. There's no question about that.
Just giving you a little academic reference to the reality historically, right? But so here's some people's comments. Jennifer O'Lee says, it doesn't matter what I'm okay with as an American Christian. What is our Constitution okay with? Because our Constitution is the only thing that matters, not our feelings. See, there are still educated and insightful and not ridiculous people that exist in this country. I think that's the vast majority. The problem is that these people, with their Laura Loomer shared in 3 million views, these are the minority. They are the ones screaming from the rooftop because the minority has control of the media structure. That's what's happening. This person says, I have a problem with Israel dual citizens running our government. There's a lot of people speaking up around this, but the bottom line is, no matter what you think, they have a right to practice their religion, just like everybody else in this country. Just because you trying to make Islamic or Muslim or anything outside this country somehow indicative of terrorism, it just shows you what a gross, disgusting, uneducated person you are, Tom, or whoever else is sharing it on this account, seeing as how it's the Borders Are News account or whatever it's called. Independent MAGA News reports. But here is another representative of the United States government, one of which is openly endorsed by Donald Trump, Senator Randy Fine, who back in 2021, just showing you this is not relating to October 7th alone, January 4th, 2021, this person posts a picture of a dead child. It says, supporting killing innocent people and babies and smearing voices that fight against genocide for some AIPAC money says a lot about your character. You should be ashamed of yourself. How do you sleep at night? That's in response to somebody. That's Randy Fine. Keep telling yourself that. But you feel free to read the rest of this. It's disgusting. But this is what he says based on this dead child. Quite well, actually, in regard to sleeping well. Thanks for the pick. We need to recognize that this is not a joke about racism or whatever else. It's not. It seems like they want to label racism against anybody they don't like. And it's not just about racism. It's about extremism, guys. Whether it is Muslim extremism, whether it is Jewish extremism, whether it is Christian extremism, right? There's somebody earlier who goes, I've never heard you criticize Islam. Well, then you're not effing paying attention, because it's not about one thing or the other. It's about anybody acting in extreme measure. Anybody acting their religion gives them the right to violence to somebody else. All of them are the problem. And all of them in every religion have people that act through it peacefully. People that are trying to broad stroke anything should be called out for what they are. And that's where these people make their money. I said statements like this are appalling and deserve to be called out. What about the Palestinian Americans dying in Gaza, Randy Fine? Here's what he says in first to that. He says, I want to be exceedingly clear. I could care less what happens to Gazans, so long as Americans, young girls and babies are held hostage. Bombs away. So I said, what about the Americans that are there? What about the hostages that are there? They don't care, guys. They've been telling you that their war is with Palestine from the very beginning, if you're listening. Stephen Miller of the Trump administration, Deputy Chief of Staff, says, if you support terrorism and hate our civilization, we will revoke your visa and deport you. Right. Despite due process and constitutional law, these are people that are destroying the Constitution using something they know you're probably going to agree with. Hassan says, so when are you reporting all those who support the terrorism Israel's doing to Palestinians? This is a new picture of an infant child that was just bombed in Gaza. 53% of Gaza's children. Israel's war on Hamas is in reality a war on children. Children like this baby who are already seeing more pain than most of us will while still in a diaper, because Israel doesn't discriminate between children and the enemy. Sorry to have to share that with you, but it's important that we recognize what's actually happening here, guys. So Stephen Miller says if you support terrorism. So by that, they mean if you support people that, I mean, anything we're talking about, just let's make it very simple. We already have shown just today alone that they're using the word terrorism for things that don't apply. And then saying, because we call you terrorists, then we can do whatever we want. Okay. So then if you support whatever they claim it is terrorist, then you're suddenly a terrorist and hate our civilization, both of which you have a legal right to think and say what you want. You can support what you want. You can say what you want. That is what we actually understand as inherent rights of the Constitution. Stephen Miller, Trump, Elon Musk, Biden, and Kamala Harris do not care about your constitutional rights. How many times over can they show you that? But you see, they pass the baton off, right? They go after your rights because of woke ideology. Then they use that very thing in reverse to make you guys go after it for them. And one after another, they force you to call for your own subjugation. And then this is the post I made about Alex Jones is ridiculous. Elon is America, which is just almost insulting to America. I thought it was interesting. This guy says, standing up for free speech is American. Deporting illegal immigrants is American. Getting rid of government corruption and waste is American. You're so hyper-focused on Israel, you can't see the forest through the trees. What's funny, you look at his account, it's very clear what this person is a blind supporter of Israel. It's spectacularly obvious if you look at his account. He says, never seen you criticize Islam, not once. Even though, like I just said, I've countless times criticized all of it. All of it. Anybody that's breaking the law, anybody that's being irrational, anybody that's being violent, to pretend somehow like this. The point is right now, there is an endless amount of evidence showing you that people are using religion all over the world to carry out violence for very clear political reasons. All of it should be condemned in any context. And I said, thank you for making there's more conversation there. But the point is, down here, he says, standing up for Elon is standing up for America. Point blank, period. You're claiming otherwise, which is a clown opinion. So I just want to show you the basic reality of this kind of arguments, where the final point is the reiteration of opinion based on nothing other than that's the case and you're done. That seems to be where this is going. And the idea is that, of course, doesn't want to address the obvious Great Reset point that's made in there, only about Israel. But I think it's interesting that they continue to make, and now I think the reality is you look at this, my point is that people that want to make it about only Israel, you're only focused on Israel. Well, let's be clear again, that if you're an American, then it now has become your problem. If you don't want to recognize what Israel's doing in Americans' names through our government, then you don't care about America. But on top of that, realize that it's obviously important even outside of that. We're talking about human lives. And as you want to make it only about America, funny how when we actually turn back to America, you only want to care about something else. So the only people actually fighting for this country are people that are trying to solve these problems. The people screaming America first, the team sport politics, are literally fighting for somebody else. And to that point, which is why I brought it right there, saying that we're over-focused on Israel, well, guess what, guys? If that's the case, so too is Judge Napolitano, so too is, what's the name again, Colonel McGregor. Not that those things have to sway your opinion. My point is that these are very in-depth, insightful, long-term people that are, they're a judge, they're a colonel. They're literally about to tell you the same thing we're talking about. So if we're obsessed with Israel, then ask yourself why a huge portion of the conversation, if not the majority, is also talking about it. Not that I need that or even trying to make an excuse. The point is, we already know. You already know if you're paying attention. I'm simply adding to the point for people that are trying to downplay this, desperately it seems, for their own selfish interests. This is obvious right now.
Do you think, Colonel, President Trump unleashed Prime Minister Netanyahu to resume genocide in Gaza, which unfortunately resulted, I say unfortunately, it was intentional, the killing of 400 civilians in the past 2 days?
I don't think he has any choice. I think when he ran for office, he made certain agreements with major donors. These donors move far beyond just Miriam Adelson. And these donors oblige him to effectively underwrite whatever Mr. Netanyahu wants to do. I thought it was interesting that a recent meeting was set up for the United States with Azerbaijan to talk about cooperation with Israel, but is set up by Mr. Netanyahu. He called and made the arrangements with Mr. Aliyev, who's the president of Azerbaijan. The State Department did not do it. I think we're very much in the grip of the Israel lobby, and I think President Trump is obliged to go along, and I don't see any evidence that he's going to diverge from that path.
Does he have no choice but to back up Israel militarily when it attacks Iran?
I think so. And keep in mind, you always have the possibility that a war is precipitated somehow by Israel somewhere in the region with Iran. The Iranians respond. And the expectation is, with the buildup of force in the region, we're sending additional carrier battle groups over there right now. The expectation is that we will reinforce whatever the Israelis want to do. We've already done all of the planning for joint strikes and joint strike packages. We're sharing all of the intelligence with our vast satellite arrays with theirs. So I think it's a foregone conclusion. I can't predict when or how, but I think it's going to happen.
Can you get your hand?
It's just crazy not to see how verifiable this all is. And you still have people pushing back, primarily the Musk-Trump circle. It's very obvious what's happening, guys. It's undeniable right now. They are literally in line. I mean, it's what a lot of us and a lot of people like them are pointing out. Israel is controlling this cabinet, guys. It's just time to stop being so childish about it and stop pulling these punches. And I'm speaking directly to people who are in the team sports circle, probably won't listen. I know most of the rest of you are already trying to scream from the top of your lungs about how obvious it is. He says, exactly, Colonel McGregor, how long have we all said that Trump is owned by Israel? Those who support Trump and now moan his unquestioned support for Israel have not been paying attention while claiming to be streetwise. They're not. Trump is owned by Israel and does whatever they and their donors, sponsors, and assets running America tell him. You've been had, MAGA and MAGA media. It always was always coming, and it's time to face reality. Now, to end on some important reality overlap to what Israel is currently doing. Just in case you missed it. While the rebels float the idea of deporting Americans to literal El Salvador concentration camps for vandalizing Teslas, this is what actual terrorism looks like. And all of the U.S. government supports it. All of it. This has been out since March 13th. More than a human can bear. Israel's systemic use of sexual, reproductive, and other forms of gender-based violence since October 2023. And it goes back well before that. And there's been like 4 or 5 reports just about what they're doing to Palestinians since October 2023. Before we play the video of a new whistleblower calling this out, the important point to mention here, the word concentration camp often gets a lot of political pushback. The definition is literally a place where large numbers of people, especially political prisoners or members of persecuted minorities, are deliberately imprisoned in a relatively small area with inadequate facilities, sometimes provide forced labor and await mass executions. So maybe save for the mass executions, that is exactly what they sent them to in El Salvador. That's their public description of what they're doing. No, it's very small, tiny rooms. There's no outside area. There's only a very small thing for light. They do forced work. And they're sent there for clearly political reasons. This is exactly what this is. Now, just in addition to all the many reports the UN's put out, here is a report coming from a new whistleblower. Israeli civilians were invited to Israeli torture camps to watch nude Palestinians get searched and raped, according to the testimonies of Palestinian women released by the IOF. Both female and male Israeli soldiers raped Palestinian women from Gaza and the West Bank. The testimonies are presented at the UN Commission. Now, as always, we shouldn't blindly accept what they say face value either. Question it all. Everybody has a reason to deceive for their own personal reasons. My point in showing you the first part is that there is a mountain of verifiable evidence that this is indeed happening. Now, maybe she's still lying about it. The reality is, though, it's hard to ignore when you know there's provable evidence about this. So knowing that they can prove this is happening, look at it in this light and think about what she's saying. Especially as we just talked about how you have people in Israel literally defending and on corporate media on the largest shows in Israel debating why they should be able to rape prisoners in Israel. It's pretty obvious to see what's happening here.
Taken to sedate the man, and she was nude searched over and over again and filmed, and then she was raped twice by Israeli male soldiers, 2 of them at a time, while videotaping her.
This starts.
Sorry.
Who was also taken.
That was an accident.
While videotaping her. We have also one testimony of a woman who was also taken She says she was also raped by an inspection device by a female soldier more than once. They inserted the inspection device in her rectum. We have also one testimony of a woman saying that she was strip searched and they would beat her on her behind and they would humiliate her in front of each other. Most of the women also who were taken from Gaza, West Bank, and Jerusalem said they were beaten on their genitals, which has made us to conclude that there must have been a directive that's been given to the Israeli army to treat women in such manner, because in Jerusalem you're treated by completely different law enforcement than in Gaza or in the West Bank. But all these women said they were beaten on their genitals.
And I could just add on about the women who were forcibly disappeared in Gaza. Like I said before, it was usually as they were fleeing south through the safety corridor, they were abducted at the checkpoint. Many were taken to the Zakim detention center and then Negev detention center, and all together in one large hall, forced to strip completely naked and just sit in this hall, the women amongst each other and the men amongst each other. And it's also been reported and known that Israeli civilians are invited to come to this detention center and mock the Palestinian prisoners while they're naked, photograph them, and watch them as if it's a zoo. So that's something that we've seen.
Also, when it comes to checkpoints, like I said, it's where the sexual violence happens and it goes unreported. So we have a testimony of a teenage girl who was made to undress a man because he refused to undress. They made her undress him, even though she's not related to him. She doesn't know who that man is. And while being searched and touched and molested on their breast and on their genitals as well.
Here is a report from Haaretz. I mean, that video speaks for itself, guys. The evidence is overwhelming. This is again from the leading Israeli newspaper. Israel recently committed the largest child massacre in its history. The numbers are not reported in the Israeli media, and if they are, it's always minimized. Here's what it says. Israel recently committed the largest child massacre in its history. 200 children and 100 women were killed in one day. Altogether, about 400 civilians were killed, and the number of dead is not yet final. These numbers are not reported in the Israeli media, and if they are, it's always minimized in an outrageous manner. For example, Channel 12 News, Israel's mainstream television station, reported that the 400 dead were, quote, operatives. How can you claim that they were all operatives when it's completely clear that the entire world is seeing the horrifying pictures of dozens of babies and children bombed to death? How is it possible to lie so blatantly when the truth is so clear? For how long will the Israeli media be complicit in the crimes of the Israeli government? The majority of the Israeli public, which opposes the war, thinks that the war jeopardizes the hostages' lives, which it does, and that the fighting was resumed for political reasons. But after 18 months of mass killing, which will enter the history books as an eternal disgrace, that mechanism can no longer work. It says, although resuming the war will kill the hostages, it mainly kills masses of Palestinian men, women, and children, and the elderly. It's already impossible to distinguish between things in Israel. It's impossible to distinguish the media from the public, because even those who oppose the war are afraid to say that Gazans are human too. The majority of the people not only tolerate mass slaughter, but demand it, either explicitly or tacitly. This isn't a problem of the media concealing or manipulating. It is the fruit of militaristic, racist indoctrination that begins in kindergarten and continues until death. An indoctrination that needs destruction to justify the existence of Zionism. Now, if you can't see the beginnings of that happening in this country already, whether for Zionism or something else, the radicalization of the population to justify whatever they want, whenever they want. It's the same thing they're doing there. To get you to hate your neighbor. Militaristic, racist indoctrination. Guys, this is what they're doing in every context we can see. It's not even about one particular thing. It's just about having you so full of hatred and outrage, they can throw you at whatever they want, as long as it's not them. How is it possible to insist on freedom and justice without any reference to the inconceivable human price of this war? How is it possible to devalue life in Gaza, which has become so cheap for Jews in Israel, while simultaneously calling for the preservation of Israeli democracy? Exactly what democracy are we talking about? One that carries on its back such enormous, terrible destruction every day? Everyone sees it, guys. Everyone. There's just people that choose to ignore it. Now, here is another discussion from a doctor who was there. A war correspondent who has covered 18 wars and 3 different genocides and has never, ever seen something like this. Pretty much like every other doctor or war correspondent that comes back and tells you what they see.
Janine, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I have to say something. As someone who runs a war crimes unit in Ukraine and the parts of the Middle East, and as someone that has worked in Gaza since I'm 21 years old, from the first Intifada, I worked consistently in Gaza. What has happened with us watching, the international community allowing what has happened, has been probably the most shocking and distressing thing I've seen in my lifetime. And I've gone through 18 wars and 3 genocides. What we're doing is creating double standards of humanitarian assistance. There is one set of laws for Ukraine, and I work in Ukraine, and I'm very deeply loyal to what is happening there. But there is one thing that happens in Ukraine, and there's another thing that happens in Gaza. If a bomb falls on a hospital in Ukraine, Ursula von der Leyen says it's a war crime, and 6 people are killed. If a bomb falls, if many bombs fall in Gaza, and hundreds of people are killed overnight, well, that's Israel's right to defend themselves. When how many thousand children? 13,000 children have been killed in Gaza. We barely focus on that. But when there's one family, and the Israeli hostage family that came back, the world suddenly is stunned and empathetic. What has happened to us as human beings if we allow this to happen on our watch? I don't know about you, but I can't sleep at night and I can't live with myself knowing that we are allowing this to happen. We said never again after the Holocaust, and yet what we have right now is an absolute catastrophe and beyond any kind of cruelty, Israeli policy.
There are so many people speaking up. I don't know how you ignore and deny something like that. Like, these people have precedent, they have standing, they know. I mean, of course, they could always be driven by politics, always. But the simple breadth, the amount, the volume of people that have continued to tell you exactly the same thing, and people just choose to fall in line. I mean, this is why, again, it is so obvious that they're losing control. I mean, this is why I think it's always obvious and always clear that there are more good people that want good things in the world than they're not. And that's why you can't, you see this and you just can't keep, you either choose to check out, which is a small portion, who knows how many, they just don't want to see it. They don't like to, obviously nobody likes what's happening, but they just kind of choose to ignore because they don't like it. Maybe because they're partisan, or it doesn't matter. But most people, if truly confronted with this, can't continue pretending it's okay. And that's why these people are screaming you down on Twitter, because they want you to believe you're the only one that thinks that way. They're wrong. The White House has said that Trump fully supports what Israel's doing in Gaza. No surprise there, guys. Promises made, promises kept, right? Is that what we promised, to continue murdering Gazans? Or did you promise to end it on day one? Well, here is what he promised, or at least insinuated and claimed back in May 2024. Might seem a little bit jarring considering what he's currently doing.
I look at your policies, I see secure the borders, bring jobs back. I look at the Democrats and many Republicans, and it's foreign war and foreign expansion. That's right. What is that?
I just think it's hilarious that Tim's over here acting like, even at that time, what a dumb thing to say. It has so obviously been an all of government war ongoing. I mean, you can clearly map out how these wars have continued through many administrations. That guy has seemingly always been somebody playing the game. You could think what you want about it. That's just either you don't know what you're talking about right there, or you're manipulating. Those are the only 2 things that would make sense to me. Here's Trump's answer.
I think it's just a failed mentality. It's crazy. You can solve problems over a telephone. Instead, they start dropping bombs. I see recently they're dropping bombs all over Yemen. You don't have to do that. You can talk in such a way where they respect you and they listen to you.
Oh, can they, Trump? You want to show us? Do you want to demonstrate that practice today? I mean, think about what's going on. Like, the point is, even at that time, what was the argument? Well, Yemenis are bombing in Saudi Arabia. They want to kill all the Jews in Israel. That was the same thing they were saying. The problem was it wasn't getting as much of attention. So if your argument is they're not killing people, they're blocking shipping lanes for specifically people who are illegally supporting a genocide per the international community, and argue that that's more justifiable of bombing them than what you were all claiming was happening in 2024 or before that. I mean, anybody who has any level of a consistent logic is going to say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Even if you want to believe everything they're claiming about the Houthis, which you can prove isn't true, what they said was happening before, which he was telling you was not enough, you should talk to them instead, was more. But no, it doesn't matter because it's all narrative. He wanted to appear to be the rebel pushing back against the structure, and now you see that that was a lie. Hopefully. Aaron says, oh, he was just quoting what he said, saying, Donald Trump on bipartisan warmongering. Now, in Israel, 2/3 of the people that have been killed, rather in Gaza, were women and children, as we've seen and every report that comes out of there, and especially since we know that half the country was people under 18 before this started, at least the current part of it. Alan Mizrahi shared a clip, just a little insight into what the daily life of somebody in Gaza is like.
Gaza is under fire and siege beneath the weight of a war that remains largely silent as the bombs continue to fall, as families continue to grieve. One question remains, until when are we supposed to keep doing this? Why do we have to live in a constant state of waiting for death or for everything to be lost? As this war rages on, Israel has tightened its grip on Gaza. The borders are closed, trade segregated. The simple act of securing a meal has become a daily struggle. Goods are scarce. The most basic necessities are now out of reach for many, leaving families in a constant state of survival. As we try to survive, all the while we wonder who will the war take next. Will it be the elders who should be enjoying the peace of old age? Or the children who should be enjoying a life of play and laughter? Once they start, the bombs never stop. They fall without warning, striking randomly, without regard for who or what they hit. We know that schools and hospitals, places meant to provide safety and healing, are no longer safe, but we shelter in them anyway, because there's nowhere else for us to go.
A pro-Palestine friend sent him this. It says it's a short, unfiltered look at life in Gaza and genocide. Journalists and activists from Gaza filmed and narrated it. Just look at what Israel bombs and bombs and bombs and bombs. Carve it into your memory because they are going to lie to us and gaslight us ferociously, mercilessly. We will need to be strong and just as we are now. Muhammad Safa points out there has never been a war in history where 80% of the country has been destroyed, 100% of the people displaced, and 50% of the deaths children. That's what we call genocide. Now just take a look. Just absorb what you're looking at right there, guys. I mean, at the very least in living memory, I've never, ever seen something like that. Look at that. Look at that population. Literally just wandering, scattered along the beach because everything else is, I mean, even there, they're being bombed on the beach too. They're being starved and attacked. And I mean, everything you can imagine. How can we not look at this and realize what exactly we're staring at? No matter what the justification, these people have been displaced from their home because of, I mean, remember the beginning pinpoint surgical targeting of Hamas? Here we are. Oh, and now they're pinpoint targeting and destroying all of Syria and pinpoint targeting, destroying in Lebanon. You know, the same thing they're doing everywhere, which is because they're expanding their territory like they've always told you, or we've always told you, and proven is the plan that they have mapped out and had conferences about and have names for their settlements, but it's all fake news and you hate Jews. That's it. That's the only thing that matters, even though you can prove all those things. Aaron Mate highlights what Muhammad Shihada was highlighting of a report from what quoted what Netanyahu said by the Israeli media. Aaron simply says this order is clear-cut evidence of a crime against humanity. I think they recognize, or at least they feel because Trump's there, that it's like they're in a different world. I mean, how else do you explain this? At least Biden, not saying good or bad here, they both were playing their part in continuing this genocide. The point is that at that time, Biden played the role of acting like we want to kind of fight you, but then giving them everything they need. Trump has just given them the red carpet. You do what you need. It says Netanyahu erupted in anger. This is quoted from Ynet News. Yelling and banging on the table. Why not 5,000? He scolded the chief of staff. We don't have 5,000 approved targets, he said. I'm not interested in targets. Direct quote from Netanyahu. Take down houses, bomb with everything you have. That is now directly quoted by Israeli media from a meeting of Netanyahu about what they're going to do. But this was on October 9th. You starting to see the picture? We already know all of this. You can now prove it like we have been the entire time. Now, how long until the mainstream alternative media swings in after the genocide is over and starts breaking down all the important facts in order to rush you into the next lie? Right? That's always how this works, guys. The things that we were proving then become the truth of today for the next deception. And it's easy to trick partisanship like that. It's disgusting. Here's the link as always, because he always shares the link. Now, I'm going to skip this just for time because I'm going to wrap here, but this is another video just showing you that it's happening in the West Bank too, because that is one of the agreements that Trump made with Netanyahu, that we will let you annex the West Bank. And he also got paid $100 million from Mary Madelson to do this, to allow that. But Netanyahu made a deal with him about the fake ceasefire that they now broke exactly when we promised you they would, because we knew that was the deal. And the Knesset was publicly telling you that. Your fake media, both the mainstream alternative and the corporate and your government, were lying to you about it, even though you could prove it. And then here we go. Now they broke it. Second phase. It's all because of you. And that's the lie they've been saying the entire time. It says, we've always lived here. Our whole lives are here. This is the West Bank. Where else can we go? These settlers are increasingly threatening their families and forcing them off their land. This is an international, everywhere in the world, they acknowledge this is a crime and no one does anything about it. And there's not even some legal dynamic. These people are raping and murdering and burning houses down. And that's not hyperbole, guys. That's on the record. That's human rights groups. They're showing you what they're doing. Where is everybody? So we have to understand that the people in power all around the world don't care about anything they claim, or something is stopping them from doing something about it. Now, this is Haaretz. Israel, not Hamas, is derailing the Gaza ceasefire and preventing the hostage return. Just the last show, I showed you 7 different articles proving to you that Netanyahu has been deliberately sabotaging this from day one. Ben-Gvir admitting he's been doing the same, all on the record. And you still get the Zionist sycophants and their supporters shouting you down on Twitter because you hate Jews. It's obvious what's actually happening. And no, I don't. Mostly I am working alongside the Jewish people out here that are calling out the Zionists who are lying about all this. Or any other religion for that matter. Anybody honest, I'm happy to partner with in regard to fighting for the truth. AIPAC says Hamas could have ended the war in Gaza months ago by surrendering and freeing the hostages. You mean like exactly they did? Aside from surrendering, they released the hostages per the deal. It says Hamas could have extended the ceasefire deal by accepting the U.S. proposals. But you see, that's the lie, and they know that because they're an Israeli group that lies to Americans. I'll play a clip. Actually, did I not grab that? Oh, how did I miss that? Hold on. It's a perfect time to play this clip. Just on the way out here. Let me see if I grabbed it still. I hope I did. It was a clip that I was going to share. Yeah, here it is. Perfect. Nope, that's the wrong page. Hold on. Let me grab this real quick. This is really important to understand because, she very clearly lays this out. And even though she's being way too kind to this monster, let's see, let's do that. She very clearly articulates the reality here. And this is the Israeli ambassador you've seen lie many times, lying about churches not being in Gaza, lying about Christians not being in Gaza, being called out and caught live on an interview and then just deflecting to something else. These are liars, guys. They know they're lying because they know that what they're doing is wrong, or at least they know you think it's wrong. So they're lying about the ceasefire deal. That's the main point here. So here is even corporate media pushing back on basic facts, and they just can't accept that.
Emily, firstly, what are your thoughts on the interview? And
oh, shoot, that's the wrong one. Hold on. Pretty sure I got, that's so strange. Hold on. There we go. I'll play that one next. And then we only have 2 more things we're going to get to really in this wrap up. This one here. Okay. And here you go.
Hamas broke the ceasefire.
Right.
But Hamas released all of the hostages that was agreed in phase 1. Phase 2 has not begun yet. So how has Hamas broken the ceasefire?
Let's get the facts right.
Because some people would say that it's Israel that's broken the ceasefire by the airstrikes.
Some people being the Israeli media, by the way.
And also by the limited ground operation that you were doing in an area that you were not supposed to be in.
Let's get the facts right. We had an agreement led by American envoy Witkoff.
Led by.
The agreement was very simple. 42 days for the first phase. At the 1st of March, this phase was over. So Israel agreed to continue the ceasefire, just in one condition.
Yeah,
but please let me.
She was going to jump in and say, but that didn't need to be agreed to. You agreed to the first and second conversation at the beginning, and the argument was in between the first and the second, you would then discuss how to end that, not propose new things before the second even begun. The point is, what Israel was doing purposefully, and everyone's calling this out with a brain, and Israeli media too, they were in the first phase saying, we're not going to the second phase until you meet our demands. Witkoff and Trump stuck their fingers in it and said, we now demand more things now before you. And she'll even try to say that, even though that's verifiably a violation of the deal they both agreed to before they got there. All they had to do was step into the second phase, which was then about getting the rest of the hostages back. So if their claim is we want the rest of the hostages back, all you had to do was step into the second phase and boom, you got them all back. But she's trying to play. It's like having your cake and eat it too. It's actually embarrassing to watch them try to struggle through this logic.
March, this phase was over. So Israel agreed to continue the ceasefire, just in one condition.
Yeah, but
please let me finish. Please let me finish, because people don't get the framework that we were working on. The framework was very clear. Hamas must release hostages in every single week.
And they did, up until you started adding new demands.
We waited 3 weeks. We waited 3 weeks with.
And that's 3 weeks of the second phase before they went to the second phase. And in those 3 weeks, they were asking for more things, which was not what they agreed to. And Hamas simply said, we're waiting for you to follow the deal into the second phase, where then we will release all the rest of the hostages. It's very simple.
No hostages being released. Do you expect Israel to sit and do nothing when 59 people from our people are dying there in the tunnels?
Oh, they're dying now. You mean maybe because you're bombing them or they're starving? Because none of the rest are dying for any other reason than being bombed by Israel. Or we could talk about the 10,000 people that Israel's holding and no one cares about that.
Do you expect Israel to do nothing?
That's absolutely not. But my confusion here is, right, phase 1 ended, as you said. Hamas released all of those hostages. I accept some of them were dead. Some of them were in awful conditions. I completely accept
remember
that.
the Bibas family.
Yeah, let's deviate into the thing. The people that we killed, or the people that were mildly malnourished, despite everyone Israel releases being emaciated beyond belief, having holes in their legs or arms cut off. But she has to say this because that's probably pressure from her media outlet. We know they were terrible. Did you say that about all the other people that are currently starving in Israel? It's just insane. But that all aside, she really tried to derail it with the Bibas family, but she pushed.
I completely
remember the Bibas family funeral that was devastating.
They released the hostages that were agreed in phase 1.
Yep.
The original deal was then that phase 2 would begin, which Israel has not accepted.
Yep.
Israel wants to continue with phase 1. So some would say that you have renegade on the original deal.
Yep.
That it was
says it's funny. She says renegade. I think renege is the way you say that.
Israel who's renegade on that original deal and not Hamas.
Sophie, as I said again, Israel wanted to do a long ceasefire just for one reason. We don't want to fight.
I mean, see what a dumb. This is the kind of thing you're getting from the Trump and the Elon side. That in no way answered the question. That is pivoting into we're on your side. You're on my side. You know we're good and we want good things. That's what she's doing. We don't want to fight. Her point was very specific, and all she's doing is trying to dance around it because they're very dishonest people. I'm talking about specifically the people that are lying to you, nothing other than that.
This is our brothers.
But phase 2 is about with the permanent withdrawal and the release of all the hostages. If I got this wrong,
see, very clearly, all you had to do was go into second phase, and you would have got what you're pretending you wanted right there.
Yes.
No, but I don't.
Yes, you're getting it wrong because
that
you
is
don't understand the agreement.
The agreement was phase 1, which has been completed,
finished at 1st of March,
moving into phase 2, and you and the US, I agree, are trying to continue
the phases
phase
included.
1, but that was not the original agreement.
It's just it's infuriating. It's logically impossible. You don't understand. But this is what you do. You're dishonest. You know everyone sees you. So you just hope you're pushing back and you're going to get the support of the people who will support you no matter what. Now, here is a follow-up.
Happening in Gaza. Emily, firstly, what are your thoughts on the interview and what's happening in Gaza?
So I think that what the ambassador was failing to acknowledge is that the deal that was agreed was one that many people in the international community, including President Biden, felt was ready to go last summer. And first of all, there were grave doubts as to why it had taken so long for it to be implemented in January. It could have happened much earlier. Biden said that, and the rest of the community feel the same. And it happens in phases. And as you were trying to say, phase one is a kind of almost like the easy bit. You release hostages and we will release prisoners and there will be a ceasefire. And then we move to phase two. And phase two is Israeli withdrawal, but still more hostages and more prisoners being released. And, and also negotiations beginning for what will be the long-term future for Gaza. Now,
Yeah, she said it much better than I did. And the bottom line is they would continue to release the hostages, but it includes then the conversation of not just the hostages, but what will then become of everything beyond this, which is exactly what Israel has told you is never happening. I mean, like repeatedly, explicitly, we will never, ever, ever allow that. And then they go through this process and we expect something different. They've already made it very clear, if you've ever been paying attention, of what they actually want to accomplish here. The death of all Palestinians. And they repeatedly keep screaming that as loud as possible.
What happened was that we got to the 1st of March and the Israelis unilaterally, as far as I can see, said, we're not going into phase two. We want to just stay on phase one. We want to just keep having more hostages and releasing prisoners.
It's because they knew that Donald Trump would support them. That was the agreement, guys. We told you that on January 15th.
Not prepared to talk about moving out of Gaza, nor are we prepared to talk about a future for Gaza. And the reason for that is because Netanyahu is clinging on to power by his fingernails. He has to pass a budget at the end of March, and he has to pass that budget in order to continue the government that he's in charge of. And if he isn't in charge of the government in Israel, he personally gets into a great deal of trouble. There are court cases swirling around him, there are inquiries and everything else. So what he wants to do is he wants to extend that period as long as he can, and so that he can keep in power. He then begins the bombing. I'm sorry to be quite as brutal as this, but I really can't see any other explanation for this. He begins the bombing.
And why would you have to apologize? Like, doesn't that show you everything? What she's saying is very easily provable. It's factually correct, but we have to apologize because logic, when it has to do with Israel, can be uncomfortable.
Who's pulled out, can keep in power. He then begins the bombing. I'm sorry to be quite as brutal as this, but I really can't see any other explanation for this. He begins the bombing. Ben-Gvir, who's pulled out of his government, comes back into the government again, so helping to shore up the government, helping to get his budget through. And in the meantime, 300 plus Palestinians are killed.
400.
And the war aims are not clear as to what it is that they're doing. Who is it that they're going after? They say they're still going after Hamas after all this time. But how is it, if they're going after Hamas in a way which is proportionate, that we get so many civilians that are killed? And that is the problem. And that is the problem the Israeli ambassador has when it comes to answering this.
It's not a problem. It's dishonesty. She knows what they're doing. They're murdering people for their own agenda, and they know you don't want that. So they lie. That's it. Now, again, AIPAC. Hamas could have extended the ceasefire deal by accepting proposal. No, they could not have. Had they accepted the deal for you to release all their hostages, why would they even go into second phase if you gave them all back in the first phase? I mean, it's not even logical, guys. It's a desperate plea, a desperate ploy to get you to just side with them based on a lie they're patching together after the fact. That's what AIPAC is. AIPAC Tracker says Israel could have ended their genocide of Palestinians and had all of their civilian hostages back on October of 2023. As the Jerusalem Post highlighted, they already said they would release them all if they simply stopped bombing Gaza, as well as the 9th and the 10th of October, as even Times of Israel highlighted. And even in between that, they had deals for all of them if they would stop. I mean, over and over and over. I don't even need to bring them all up again. I don't think I'm even convincing anybody other than you all know it, and anybody else who's disagreeing doesn't care if I show the facts. There's 100 articles from Israel, from Times of Israel, from Haaretz telling you they've been sabotaging this deal from day one. Now, Katz, of course, who's just out there publicly telling and threatening all of Palestinian civilians, they're now going to begin annexing Gaza. What a shock. You mean that thing that we were told would never happen because that's total? It was always the plan. How can you annex Gaza if you make a deal to allow them to remain, right? So it's obviously the same thing. It's been an obvious one-sided agenda that's never stopped, left or right of this government, that they've always supported. You just got to start being honest about this, guys. It's just like pretending that we don't know Al-Qaeda and ISIS are literally proxy elements of the U.S. and Israel. Now, that doesn't mean every single piece of everything. I doubt they control it all. That's probably the biggest problem. The point is that they have been funding, feeding, using, especially this ISIS-K overlap, recently anyway, the whole apparatus. You can literally prove this. It's one of the most provable things in this entire conversation. Now, here is what the Witkoff element, this is the person they were referencing, right? Where they were Trump and Witkoff at it. That's them inserting themselves into an already decided deal and acting like this is Hamas's fault. Here's Tucker talking to him about this. I was laughing about, what's his name? I forget his name. Somebody basically don't you get tired of Tucker's gosh golly shtick where he acts like he doesn't know? Just look at the comments or it's just funny. Like, well, what does that even mean? Like, how dare you talk about basic things we all understand that he knows about? My point though in this is talking about the outcome. Acting as if we don't already know exactly what Israel's trying to accomplish, because everyone, including Netanyahu, including Ben-Gvir, including everyone in their government, have all publicly told you what they're trying to accomplish. If you can't see by now that one of two things is always, either Tucker somehow doesn't know any of that, which should shock you from a journalist perspective, or he does, and he's pulling punches for very clear reasons. It's everywhere you look. And this Witkoff guy, who is a card-carrying Zionist, who is literally rationalizing everything for the direction of Israel. That's Trump's entire cabinet right now.
Business guy there. It could be amazing. Completely agree.
They're talking about Gaza, by the way. You mean a place where people have an entire civilization? Yeah, we could get rid of them. It'd be great. Even that talking point is just so unnerving to me that they either don't care that they're destroying an entire population to roll in something they're going to sell to people, or I guess they don't even, I don't even know what an alternative would be to that. Like, you don't know what you're doing. I mean, how else do you recognize how gross this is?
I think the core question is the map. For thousands of years, it's been about the land. What does the map look like? Who controls what? And
yeah, whatever. I mean, this is so gross to me that anybody pretends like these people are being honest with you. Oh, thousands of years, has it? You mean despite the obvious British Balfour Declaration where they literally gave over land from Palestine to Israel? Come on, guys. You don't think he knows about that? This is not some age-old dispute. This is a less than 100 years old of a colonial project that has literally raped and tortured his people out of existence. Not hard to recognize that he knows this already and doesn't care.
It's clearly had a destabilizing effect on some of the poorer, more populated countries. No doubt. Specifically Jordan and Egypt. 100 million people in Egypt.
Yeah, he's basically referencing the Palestinian people that got pushed out of their territory. It's their fault, I'm sure.
I think it might be helpful for everybody if there was just a clear picture of when this is all done, here's what we want the map to be, and then we can debate that. Do you have any sense of what the map would look like?
Rory answers, yes. So let's demonstrate how greater Israel is going to be our outcome. They won't do that because then it just undeniably shows you their colonial imperialist agenda of just occupying more territory for their benefit at the expense of literally everybody. And Americans are funding the bill. I mean, so what if they came out tomorrow and said, here's the map we want to see, this part of Lebanon, that part of Syria? What do you mean that would make it easier to understand? It's all illegal, guys. The whole damn thing. I don't care if it's an acre or 100 mile. It is a illegal action. So too is the occupation of the Golan Heights. So too is the occupation of the, Sheba Farms in Lebanon or whatever else they've taken since then. This is not disputable, guys. This is illegal based on international law. You'd think that somebody in his position would know that. But see, the reality is he does know that.
From Israel's perspective. When you say the map, you mean what? What countries? What
countries they're going to illegally occupy? Yes, keep going with that sentence.
Israel's moved into Lebanon and Syria.
Illegally, yes.
They're not part of Israel, but they control them.
Yep, that's an illegal thing. I'd love to see some actual points there, Tucker. Feel free to jump in with, that would be illegal, though, or that would be against the law, or we should all care about that, or Americans are paying for that. Don't expect that, though.
So when all this is over, what does the Israeli government hope to control? And then if that were clear...
It is clear, if you listen.
Then I think people would say, they could either live with it or they can't, but it would have a calming effect if people knew what the goal was.
We already do, bud, and it's obvious. And calming was quite the opposite of what it would cause. because they would then, people that are trying to ignore what they're doing would be confronted with the reality of their colonial imperialist project that you're paying for. Whoever's listening, you're paying for it.
So I would say the goal begins with, how do we deal with Iran?
Of course it does. Because why wouldn't it, guys? Why wouldn't it matter whether we deal with Iran to decide where Israel's boundaries are? Do you not realize how dumb it almost is that they're basically just admitting that we are just bound by what Israel accomplishes and we have to wait to deal with that to decide what their boundaries will be? I mean, I'm almost speechless. Like, that's insane. I think my honest opinion is that they're trying to normalize slowly, incrementally, just exactly what's happening. How in the world can you pivot to dealing with Iran while you're discussing Israel's illegal occupation of other countries? Well, I can tell you why. Because these morons are literally trying to tell you that everything happening bad in the world is because of Iran. Don't trust your lying eyes. Don't look at the obvious occupations and terror and occupation and genocide. Just point at the evil Muslims and make that the case.
That's the biggie.
Yeah.
So the first is nuclear.
Yep.
We cannot have that.
Same old argument. You know, does it matter that our State Department has clearly said that's not the case, or that the International Atomic Energy Agency has clearly repeatedly said that's not happening? Or I'll show you a clip in a second. There's a tweet from Ken O'Keefe.
Right. And we can talk about it in this session.
Now, obviously, that's not the full thing. Watch it for yourself for the full context. The obvious point was about the way they're just pandering to Israel. Here is what I was referencing. Ken O'Keefe, 1984. They're about to finish the bomb, says everybody who's supporting Israel. 2025. They're about to finish the bomb. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. 1984. This is an Israeli newspaper in 1984. Iran is making the final stages of the nuclear bomb. 30 years on. You know why? Because it's never actually been the case. Now, at least what we can prove, by the way. It's always certainly possible that something somewhere, but you realize everything Israel keeps pointing to make their argument turns out to be false. Over and over and over, as far back as you want to look. We just pretend it's not there. The evidence has always been there. So here's Witkoff. Just in case you had any doubts about these people and their dishonesty, listen to this.
Business guy there. It could be
Oh, shoot. Did I close the wrong one? Hold on. Yeah, this one.
Southern Command of Israel then showed me a film of what happened on October 7th.
Yep.
And the film is horrific.
Yes.
It is about mass rapes.
Yep.
And so on the video, he pauses it. Completely 100% now proven to be false. And I mean in every possible sense. From nobody actually speaking up, to no forensic evidence, to the main example they've used now being proven to not actually be the case because they had video the entire time that showed you that it was her ankle and her wrist that made the blood spite on the back of her pants. Everything. I mean, guys, this is, I could go, I've gone through 100 shows already breaking this stuff down. You should know this by now. But just on the clip, you can look from Haaretz, you can look from the UN, you can look from the Times. Israel says Hamas weaponized rape. Does the evidence add up? No, it doesn't. Over and over and over and over. And yet they still scream this. They still scream about beheaded babies. It's just insane. As he says, the squirrel, who's been doing great work on this. And guys, if you want source material, everything he'll include in this in the thread. Steve Witkoff, Trump's Zionist envoy, says the Israeli military showed him a film about people being with mass rapes. There is no such video. That's proven at this point. The UN, Times of London, even Israeli police and intelligence themselves have admitted in Haaretz that no such video exists. So tell me something. Is he lying about the video? And that tells you everything. Or did he just pretend that he saw that? I mean, I guess it's the same point. And my point would be, I guess, do you think he's doing it because Israel asked him to? Or is he just such a Zionist supporter that he just made it up? Let's be clear. He is lying. Or doesn't know that he's lying. Either way, that's not true. Now, you go on and read it all as always. I mean, we just saw Chuck Schumer on a recent interview talk about beheaded babies. I mean, how is it possible that's still happening? Caitlin Johnstone says, Trump is butchering children in Gaza, stomping out free speech in the U.S., bombing Yemen for Israel, and preparing for full-scale war with Iran. And from what I can see, Trump supporters are mostly fine with it. Everything the so-called MAGA movement claims to stand for is a lie. Now, I don't agree with that. I'll come back to it, though. This is her opinion. I think it's easy to see the presentation as the majority. You know my opinion. I don't think that's the case. It says MAGA is just Republicans doing Republican things. I agree with that in the sense of the leadership or rulership. 10 years ago, the GOP started wallpapering over its shattered reputation from the Bush administration with a right-wing populist message, which purported to oppose neoconservative war agendas and support free speech and put America first, and want to drain the swamp. In practice, what we are seeing is Trump murdering and warmongering in the Middle East, just like Bush, rolling out freakish authoritarian agendas in the U.S., just like Bush, advancing longstanding neoconservative agendas, just like Bush, and putting Israel first, just like every Republican for decades. And Democrat, by the way. Trump is the most evil things Bush was, but MAGA morons pretend he's something different, she says, because he put on a red hat. Dumbest, most pathetic, and fraudulent political faction in existence. Now, she clearly is. I mean, look, I agree with pretty much everything she's saying if you want to lob it at the team sport politics side of this, which I don't see any different than the left. But what I believe, which I hope you're at least willing to consider, because what she's saying right there is a huge part of this that we can't ignore. It is happening. I believe that most conservatives don't think like that. Whether they see themselves as MAGA or just somebody that supports the right, whatever it is, there are people that are uncertain about what this is, but just don't have a voice. There's not enough people to see. There's a lot of that. I see it when you talk to people, you look at the comments underneath these huge influencers. They have a lot of pushback from people you can see are following them. People you can see are Republicans that are going, what are we talking about? How is that in line with the Constitution? They just don't get any influence because this platform suppresses their reach. That's what I believe anyway. I think it's very clear. My point, though, is consider this in the context of people that are on that team sport side that are effectively ushering, pipering a huge movement of people that don't know where else to look. The sad thing, though, if you can't acknowledge by now that the rulership is doing this, that they're doing exactly the opposite of other than some token Democrat hate, right? Shutting down certain woke DEI, like all these, in some cases, things I agree with. As they roll out your controlling technocratic Zionist structure, which is clearly, I mean, even if that does happen all the way and you end up in a Zionist technocratic prison, does it matter? It's at least worth considering. Now, I know that most people out there are aware of the problems we're dealing with here, how much information there is to back all of this up. Whoever it is, no matter if it's the majority or not, I think it behooves us all to take an effort to help people see this. Right? Whether it's a show that you want to create, write an article, make something on Twitter, just go out and talk to people. That's why I often talk about this, the show, using the content, clipping things out, or even just taking the source material and having a conversation, sitting down with people, especially with different opinions. Start a group, start a weekly group and have conversations about these things and make a point to make it nonpartisan, even if you are a partisan person. Make it a conversation about the facts. What can we prove? And discuss it with people. I mean, in some cases, it'll get contentious, and then make sure you point out why that, think about it, discuss why it happened. It's important to try, guys, now more than ever, as they're desperately driving you to hate your neighbors so you don't look at what's actually happening. Don't look at the people who are actually ruling over your life, who have no justification for it. Just fight for what you believe in, guys, and don't allow that to be driven by partisan agendas. I find it really hard to believe that people believe in half of what they claim the leaders of this rulership sycophant circle claim you believe. In any case, thank you for being here, tuning in, being critical, thinking, asking questions. Never a wrong time to do that. Always appropriate. Thank you for being here. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.